I think it's here.
I'm curious.
I found it. Let me tell you the story. This is where we came from. We came from a torn continent, destroyed by 2 world wars, impoverished, afloat, disoriented. But the European ideal started as a way to bring peace and stability to this continent, trying for the first time in our history to create a union of different people and culture on equal terms, a project of bringing people together, regardless of their race, gender, religion, culture. And we arrived to a point where the European Union created prosperity. Economic growth was seen as a model for other parts of the world, based on values such as democracy, tolerance, justice, human rights. Things seemed to be going in the right direction. So what went wrong?
Economic crisis, high unemployment, persistent low growth. The resurgence of populism, radicalization of society as a whole, the rise of terrorist groups who want to cause death and destruction. The future ahead seems dark sometimes, when we just focus on this news, on what pulls us apart, not what brings us together. Is this the future we want? Is this the future we see for ourselves and our children? Shouldn't we try to find a different way, tell a different story to the rest of the world? Shouldn't we tell ourselves a different story, a brighter one? A story of hope, of possibilities, of joy and happiness.
This is the story of a journey. This is the story of a new path. This is a story of a path towards a better Europe. A story of lives, like the ones of you and me, who want simple things, like peace, a job, a community who cares, an education for our children, a place where our taxes contribute to building a better society, and for a union of equality, justice, fairness. This is why we need to debate, discuss,
find new solutions.
together.
Juntos.
Społecznie.
Insieme.
Carto.
Razem. Skupaj.
Together.
Zusammen.
Sam.
Juntos.
Zajedno.
Juntos.
Ensemble.
Ja, velkommen. Velkommen.
Welcome this evening to this Together conference, Fighting for Democracy. I'm Mikael Jana, I am a journalist for Politiken. I'm the moderator this evening. We have translation to various languages. I will speak Danish and English, but there are interpreters in German, Spanish, and French, as you can see up here. Today's meeting marks a journey in politics, a journey in the Together conference, and a journey in some of the personalities you'll meet this evening. This is the 20th meeting in the conference, which has moved from Austria, where it started, and it has moved to the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. But it's also a conference which in many ways covers an even greater journey. 25 years ago, one of the main speakers this evening, Poul Nyrup Rasmussen, who's here in the first row, he was the Prime Minister in Denmark. It was when there was the Copenhagen criteria which were set down. Respect for basic democratic principles and human rights. They were key for what became a major expansion in 2004 when countries like Hungary and Poland acceded. It was Poul Nyrup Rasmussen who witnessed the political polarization we saw where Austria, where it admitted the Freedom Party into its government, a right-wing party which led to diplomatic isolation of Austria. That, at the time, what we feared was a new form of non-democracy in Europe, which we advised other countries against. It was just 7 years after the Copenhagen Declaration. Since then, it's no exaggeration to say that nationalism has washed over Europe. Austria has the Freedom Party in the government again, and we're not isolating them. We're trying to make them our partners, and in some questions they are a central partner for the current Danish government. We can see how our own social democracy has moved from a position where Poul Nyrup Rasmussen said it wasn't PC to work with them. So there are some things which have changed in terms of political polarization, and we'll talk about that. And then there's Hungary and Poland. Both countries are risking of being suspended because they don't live up to the basic rights which were defined in Copenhagen in 1993. This is after they were admitted in 2004. And they are posing a dilemma in the EU. So how can we deal with such a situation? Should we stand up for our values and suspend them? With the risk that you are criticized, that EU's leaders are determining who people should be voting for. That's what happened in Austria in 2000. Or should we say that we should work together with them and move ahead as well as we can? But there's another risk that we don't defend the Copenhagen criteria and the basic EU rights. So basically, we should discuss how we should deal with political polarization and what one of our speakers today calls illiberal democracy. We'll be coming back to this. We'll discuss this and much else. If anybody wants to tweet on what is happening tonight, use the hashtag #EuropeTogether. That tends to be rather effective and reaches a large audience. I would like to welcome the first main speaker this evening. That's Mette Frederiksen, who is the leader of the Social Democrats in Denmark and may well be the next Danish Prime Minister. Would you mind coming up here?
Og inden jeg lige giver ordet til dig.
Before I give you the floor, Mette. In these arrangements, it's not just the people up here speaking. It's very important that you too get the opportunity to put questions to Mette Frederiksen, but many of the other speakers today. But we'll come back to that. But first of all, I give you the floor, Mette. Thank you. With those words that you can have the floor too, I'll try to be brief in this introduction. I'd like to thank you for the invitation and the initiative. Politics in Denmark and Europe is very busy, and we meet each other and we discuss what the most important things, how we can make ensure vital democracy and sustainable democratic development in our own society, but in general terms. So that's very important. Thank you for the opportunity for being able to speak about the bigger picture once in a while.
To welcome our international guests to Copenhagen. I am very happy that you are joining us here today, and thank you for coming. Inden jeg går videre til det.
Before I move on to the subject today, the Copenhagen criteria, I would like to say that, and this is an advantage when you're the chairman of the Social Democrats, I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist for democracy. In the years that I have been involved in politics, not least in the global and European issues, there are many things which are going in the right direction. There are many more children today going to school than when the Copenhagen criteria were discussed and implemented. Many fewer people live in absolute poverty, and in terms of equal opportunities, we have made a major step forwards. Fewer children, women are dying in childbirth, for example. So there is progress globally and in Europe, but there are some challenges, some setbacks. In our own backyard, there are developments in Turkey, which worries us. A country which for many countries, which has been moving towards Europe and European values, is turning away. We have an aggressive president in the east. The US is withdrawing from the world scene. Also on our own rows, we are challenged by some of the things we see in Poland and Hungary. So there's plenty of things to deal with. The most important thing for me to say in terms of introduction, I'll try to be brief, democracy is only sustainable and viable if there is a properly functioning trust between us, the members of parliament, those who want to be it, and the population. There is an ongoing crisis of confidence, at least in parts of European cooperation and then in parts of the European population's view of our cooperation together. That is something we have to take more seriously. And to make a long story short, I think in Europe, on top of fine words, we have to zoom in on the key challenges. The climate crisis, when the US is withdrawing from international treaties, there's the need for what I'd like to call for a European Solidarity Pact to deal with tax avoidance and evasion, to make sure that we can finance European welfare societies with a minimum corporate tax. We need to know who's coming into Europe, and we can decide ourselves how many people come in so that we can make integration work. And last but not least, we have to deal with Europe, which, as I see it, has allowed market forces to dictate developments and to make sure that we have fair conditions for all employees. If we zoom in on those tasks, we will get more Europeans to back the European project, which is still the most important thing we have. And this is the political project which has given most results to everybody in our population and to all member states. I think I'll leave it at that in terms of introduction. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. Before I give the floor to the audience, I would just like to note that it's 25 years since the Copenhagen criteria and how we'll deal with Hungary and Poland. When you look down throughout Europe and you look through the political polarization and nationalism in countries like Hungary and Poland, and who, after 14 years as members, can't live up to the basic values, what do you see? What is your diagnosis of what's happening in Europe at the moment? It isn't easy to summarize that, because there are differences of what we see in many of the countries. For most countries, I think there are some features which are relatively similar. An increase in economic and political polarization, which I think is due to the fact that we haven't insisted on managing economic and the political development. When we look at globalization today, it has led to some good things, but it has also led to some quite the opposite. And what many people find is that their living standards haven't improved that much. At the same time, inequality has exploded. Fewer and fewer people own more and more, combined with uncontrolled immigration in many places. This means that there is a big difference of what living conditions people experience. And I think we have looked on passively when globalizations, the winners of globalization, have meant that we've got more polarization. Different countries are different, and it is the wings, the sides which have moved ahead, but they rarely can bring population together. That is what we see in various different places. How can we get the wings together? In your introduction, you said that we had the Austrian case in 2000. We said that we'll turn our back on nationalists. We don't want to work with them. We will isolate them. That didn't work. We didn't stop that wave. What do we need for societies to come together and not be polarized? I think one of the preconditions is that you don't talk about in general terms with nationalists. If we take countries and parties, there are big differences. I am a supporter of us having European cooperation which is based on national states. That doesn't make me a nationalist. I'm just as much a European as I've always been, but I'm also convinced that the primary democratic legitimation that we have in Europeans is rooted in our national states. That's not surprising, because they've been developed over many, many years. And many Danes, and I think the same goes for other countries, think that their parliament is closer than what is going on in Brussels. And that's the feeling I've had sitting in council meetings when I used to be a minister. It's easy for me to have a political discussion in my own language than in another language, for example. Rather than making that a problem, I would turn this round and say, perhaps the precondition for us supporting the European project is that we let the national state do what it should. Everything we can decide ourselves we should, and then we can concentrate on European cooperation in solving the problems that we can't solve individually. And that is the climate crisis. It is making sure that the external border works. It is fighting tax cheating and the money laundering scandals that we've seen in Denmark, which goes across borders. I think we shouldn't be careful about polarizing in the political debate. And I'm very worried about what we see also in the social media, where we see a strong tendency that where people, you are confirmed by other people who have the same opinion. We need to have an old-fashioned discussion to find the right language, right answers. My last question is Hungary and Poland. How can we deal with those countries? Because on the one hand, we should respect the national state, and there are some citizens, some voters who've voted a government which want a different way than what the EU imagines. What is the best way to deal with that? Should we suspend them? We've moved a bit in that direction. Or should we have a more cooperative course? I think I can't see an EU losing some of its member states, be it because of Brexit or other conditions. I hope that we don't end up in a situation that Poland and Hungary can't be a member states. I hope not for our European project. I don't think we should talk about the governments that have been elected in those countries. I think we should evaluate the countries and the governments based on their actions. I think restrictions in the tripartite division of country, attacks on expression of opinion and the judiciary, that is irreconcilable with the Copenhagen criterion. The Copenhagen criteria means that we define that we are a community of values. We're not just an institutional political cooperation between a number of countries and member states. We are a community based on values, and we want to be some of the leading democratic representatives. So we should evaluate people on their actions, and some of the things we see in Poland and Hungary is worrying, for example, in terms of the independence of the judiciary and limits on freedom of expression, and we should react to that. And that could involve a suspension of the two countries, says the moderator. Well, at the end of the day, it could, but I don't think that would be something to recommend. Let's take some questions from the audience. There are people with microphones. Put your hands up, and if you get the microphone, say who you are. There's a question down here. We can put your names down on a list.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Mikkel Näkkäläinen from Finland, President of Social Democratic Youth of Finland. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned the fight against... okay, not yet. You can applaud in 10 seconds. You mentioned the fight against climate change, and I was wondering that do you feel that we could develop our policy, like our trade policy, European trade policy, to fight more against climate change? Because I feel that EU is a big economic, and I feel that we should expect more with our trade partners, for example.
Jeg tror bestemt, vi kan gøre noget.
I think we can do something in terms of trade policy, and we are a big and important market. I think the most important thing we can do is to make sure that we have a high level of ambition, because that would be the best tool that we can give to European business. If you take Denmark as an example, today we are a big player in the green transition because we have some really good companies. And the point of time in Europe when we'll be free of fossil fuels could be a common decision. I think we can do that in 2045 if we can really act together. Question over there.
Okay, I'll also ask the question in English, even though I understand completely Danish. I write for Times of India and some other newspapers. Copenhagen University awarded last week a renowned professor from MIT. She was in Copenhagen, and she was awarded a doctorate degree. And her point was that, you know, we are seeing a rise of a new class, which is called precariat. It's a combination of word precarious and proletariat, like Karl Marx did. But it's a group of people who cannot make their ends meet. And she complimented Denmark and saying that please keep this model, which is social democratic model. Now, you said that, you know, of course, rising inequality is a big problem, but what are your suggestions? Do you think this model can survive, and in what way we can do, what way Denmark can act so that it can inspire other countries. United States and many other countries are looking so much towards Denmark and saying, can this function? If this functions, we will also make it function. Thank you.
Jamen, tusind tak.
Thank you very much for your support and your praise for the Danish model. And that's right. It's not always you can say that as a Dane, but we have created a unique societal model, even though we have more inequality, but it's less than in other societies because we have strong institutions and because the differences are relatively small. You ask the question, can we maintain that model of society? You can, and we must. And I myself see it as one of my most important tasks. Just two ways to do that. We should stop, as the current Danish government is doing, by giving tax breaks to the people at the top and making things more unequal. It's something that we need to hold on to in the society model we have. It's an important political task. And the other thing is, and this has to do with Europe, some of what challenges the Danish model is the free movement of labour, because whatever way you look at it, there is a pressure on parts of the Danish labour market, and it hasn't come in the top. It's not those who have the best jobs and the least pressure. It's elsewhere. It's in the transport sector, it's in construction, and in parts of agricultural production and horticulture. I think in Europe, we've had too many ideas about free movement of everything without realizing that some people are paying the price. That's one of the reasons why we've got Brexit. That's why I insist that free movement, fair enough, but no, not if it means competition in terms of wages and jobs in construction sites. I think that's a precondition if we want to hold on to the best model of society we've seen. How can we do that without risking the advantages of the single market? There are no benefits of unfair competition. There is no benefit of companies that don't want to treat their employees well and don't want to pay proper wages, that they have some benefits today. Competition is fine, but it should be a level playing field, and it could be a social protocol which we should make sure that the market doesn't come before our right to look after ordinary employers. I think that's the way we've built up our own society. Okay, companies can grow, they can produce, but never such that it's too much for people or the environment. Two more questions. One here, one further towards the back. Over here. Yes. Jørn Oranje is my name. I would like to go back and the main topic of the conference, which is democracy. I would like to ask the Social Democratic Group, what is the position of Danish social democracy when it comes to the development of democracy in the EU? I'd like to ask if we are going against a federal model like that in Germany or the US or wherever, where there are individual states where there is a federal government, or are we going towards direct elections of a European government and perhaps a European president? Or are we looking towards re-establishing the strength of the Council of Ministers based on national parliaments? Thank you very much. I was going to say no, but then there was a second stage in your question which sounded a bit more sensible. Yeah, no, we're not moving towards something federal or towards a popular elected president of Europe. On the contrary, I think if we can bring into line into what happens in countries, the governments who are responsible for their populations and our ability to deal with cross-border questions. We need a revitalization of European policy. If I should point to what institutions in European cooperation which need more power, it's the Council and not the Parliament or the Commission. Clear language. Jens Wolfgaard is my name. My question is more about the whole problem that we have in Europe around the growth in non-democratic ideas, Hungary, Poland, Germany, Sweden, partly in Denmark. There is a fear of developments which means that people vote for parties and people who apparently can calm things down. I think the solution, is what the Social Democrats are doing already, is that we should create a situation so that refugees can be dealt with in neighboring areas. What is the EU doing? The EU could do a lot more than it's doing today. I think that is the precondition for getting away from the nationalism and the unfortunate tendencies that we see in democracy at the moment. I think we should be careful for the way we look at nationalism. I see myself as a Dane. I'm proud of Denmark. I'm proud of our societal model. I see myself as a Dane before I'm a European. But I don't see a conflict about being pro-European and pro-European cooperation and being a Dane first. I would warn against the hard generalization of adhering strong national states. The second thing is, can Europe do more so that in the long run we can manage, which will be one of the big challenges, which is the migration and refugee crisis. The EU could. We're not doing enough. And it's not because we can't recognize that the agreement with Turkey and some of the North African countries has calmed down the refugee situation. Yes, that's working under the circumstances. But we should be aware of the challenge we faced. We have the highest number of refugees since the Second World War. up to 68 million people are fleeing. Even more are trying to come to Europe because the developments in Africa are going too slowly in relation to how many young people and babies are being born in Africa. Even things are calmer now. There will be huge pressure on Europe, and Europe can not house all the people, even if they have very good reasons. If you recognize that we can't help everybody, there's more responsibility to help people where they are, because Europe has tightened the conditions, but it doesn't mean there are fewer refugees, they're just elsewhere. And that is a task we have to challenge, because many of the rich countries in the Middle East aren't doing very much in terms of refugees. They're spending their time on other things, as we can see. So Europe needs to be in the forefront and needs to have Marshall assistance to help Africa and to make sure that the refugees that we can't house in our own continent. I know that my time is up. I was in Jordan myself recently in one of the biggest refugee camps is running on the Syrian border. If I think that we should be helping people in neighboring areas, I wanted to see if we can set up a decent camp. We can. That means that Europe has to be able to finance it. And we can help fewer people if we do it in neighboring areas. and we can deal with the cynicism that there is in terms of the human traffickers who send people across the Mediterranean knowing that their lives are at risk. So the task is not to do anything about refugees. That is our duty. Our duty is to find some sustainable answers which both so that Europe and neighbouring areas can deal with it. I think that's something we've thought about and developed. We need to have the EU working together on that. Thank you very much, Mette Frederiksen.
Og så kan jeg byde velkommen til verden.
Welcome to the world, Jeppe Kofod, who is a member of the European Parliament.
Næstformand også i den socialdemokratiske gruppe.
He's the vice chairman of the S&D group in the European Parliament, and he's actually the person behind the initiative for this conference. Thank you, Mikael.
In English, as a courtesy also for all of our friends from all over Europe, not only the ones in the room here, but the ones also following online what we're talking about today. Thank you all for joining us here today in Copenhagen. This very place, 25 years ago, we Social Democrats took the lead in adopting the Copenhagen criteria. With no one other than our own Poul Nyrup Rasmussen, and he's here, and we are happy, Poul, that you're here tonight. It's really great to see you again. In the chairman's seat, skillfully leading the proceedings at that time, thereby cementing democracy, rule of law, human rights, freedom of expression as a bedrock of the European Union. Tonight, a quarter of a century later, we are gathered here again from across Europe because we so clearly have something to celebrate, something to take pride in. But also because it's time to recommit to the self-same principles, adopted in Denmark, yes, but born out of European cooperation, the fundamental requirement for joining the European Union, yes, but it's truly universal in nature, these values. 25 years ago, we Social Democrats were the driving force for making democracy, rule of law, human rights, and freedom of expression the cornerstone of the European Union. Fast forward today, I'm happy to be able to say, not least based on the excellent intervention from you, Mette, that we Social Democrats remain the political family that has, does, and always will stand firm on the principle of our free, inclusive, and democratic societies. What we must never forget, however, is this principle and declarations are worth nothing if they're not concrete with the very people they are there to serve, ordinary citizens from all walks of life. To this end, allow me a brief personal note as an illustrative point. 25 years ago, when the Copenhagen criteria were agreed, just around that time, I had my first encounter with the realities that taught us the need for them. I grew up in an island of Bornholm, the pearl of the Baltic Sea, as we call it here in Denmark, a beautiful island characterized by rocks, cliffs in the north, and white sandy beaches to the south. Bornholm is Denmark's eastmost island, nestled in the middle of the Baltic Sea, geographically just as close to Swinice in Poland as it is to Copenhagen. While still at high school at the time, I had a good fortune to join one of the first Baltic Sea camps. The program brought together students like me from Denmark with same-age peers from all around the Baltics. Here I met new friends from countries that had until very recently been forcefully kept out of our European family, whose countries for the first time in many decades now were truly free, and who finally could chart a political path for themselves. My newfound friends told me how only now they feel truly free to voice their own opinions, to travel and to vote as they pleased. As for the first time ever, these young people, students just like me at the time, had the chance to speak freely with their fellow Europeans without fear of control or suppression. They told me of lives without a real say in the society they were part of, and little to no influence over their own future. Those experiences and life lessons are still imprinted to my memory today, serving as a powerful reminder that democracy and free societies are not to be taken for granted. In hindsight, the Copenhagen criteria became the model to strive for, the template for free, modern, and democratic European societies. Together, we have forced a strong European Union of free and sovereign member states based on a shared set of principles. We have so much to learn from our friends across the Baltic Sea, who throughout the 80s and in the 90s fought so bravely and also fought for a better future, a freer future, for European future. The headline for tonight is, of course, fighting for democracy. And they truly fought for democracy, true democracy, vibrant and electric. Their struggle was born out of the rejection of the dogma of the Soviet Union. They refused rightfully to accept that they would have no real impact in their own lives or reshaping their own societies. They rejected the inaction of meaningless reforms of political establishment. They set their countries on a new path. In recent years, we have seen a frightening new trend. Populists across Europe claim themselves to be spiritual successors of this movement. That they are now the opposition to an old regime, incapable of acting, stale and stuck in its ways, unwilling or unable to solve the problems experienced by ordinary people. But to these populists, I say shame. Shame on you for tarnishing the legacy of the true, internationally minded Democrats who tore down the structural beams of the Soviet Union from within with their peaceful struggle for freedom. That being said, we must not fail to recognize and we must fail to understand the real concern of ordinary citizens. Many people are feeling a certain sense of loss of control of their own lives and the directions of their societies. This is caused by a globalization that Mette also alluded to, that has been allowed to run amok, a mishandling of the financial crisis that hit ordinary citizens the hardest, whilst shielding those who already had more than enough, and by uncontrolled migration flow into Europe that left fertile ground for populists and extremists to solve division, fear and hate in our societies. I believe that only if we, as responsible political persons, that we can and will take a positive and real action to address these concerns, we can truly relegate the spectre of populism in Europe and to the asp heap of history. Only by actively and visibly taking back control over the negative forces of globalization that we see today, and only by providing a clear answer and workable solutions to the everyday concerns of citizens can we maintain support for positive international cooperation in Europe and globally. Globalization has been one of the most beneficial developments in history, ensuring that most countries in the world profit from growing economies and gains in prosperity. For too long, however, I also have to say that has come at a price that many haven't wanted to account for. I believe in managed globalization and open market, creating jobs and prosperity for the many. But I will never accept that only an elite, a few, profit from them. The spoils of globalization have been reaped by the lucky few, while the many are born to bond of the negative consequences of globalization. If this rising inequality becomes a part of people's lives, and they don't feel that their elected representatives are doing enough to support them, if ordinary citizens are left behind, then who can blame anyone if they turn their backs to the status quo? And while today we are making the 25th anniversary of the Copenhagen criteria, 2018 also marks the 10 years anniversary of the financial crisis, as we all know, the impact of which still haunt much of Europe today and marks a true example of loss of control. Millions of people lost their jobs due to the crisis and the poor way it was handled by member states, but also by the European Union. Instead of providing relief and security for citizens, protecting people and our welfare states from greedy financial sector, Well, we saw that they were bailing out banks with the pockets of welfare states, and the pockets of welfare states were deep when it was about bailing out banks. But we also saw the liberal and conservatives in Europe, their austerity policy, well, they asked people to pay the price in big cuts. Dear friend, this is not and will never be the social democratic way. If we want people to believe in common political solutions and the institutions that have governed Europe for so long, we need to address the root causes and the failed policies that have fostered mistrust in democracy itself. Therefore, we are fighting for a new approach to the European economic and financial politics, leaving behind Angela Merkel's austerity-only regime that put the needs of the markets before the needs of the people. Friends, 2019 will be a crucial year for Europe. The S&D Group will go into 2019 with a clear, defined battle plan for a new political path for Europe, a new direction for our European Union. In short, we propose a solidarity pact for Europe and for the peoples of Europe, with clear and workable solutions to the problems facing ordinary Europeans every day. We are leading the fight against tax evasion, tax avoidance, and money laundering in Europe, and will continue to do so. We want to end the race to the bottom on corporate taxation in Europe by introducing a minimum corporate tax rate that also Mette Frederiksen alluded to. We will ensure real and fair taxation of tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Apple. This will ensure that member states have sufficient means to maintain and strengthen their own welfare states, their own welfare societies. We want to stop precarious employment, zero-hour contracts, social dumping, unfair competition that lead to working poor in Europe. If Europe is reduced to being only a market, then the market forces will win, survival of the strongest. We reject this. We want a Europe for the people, a Europe that ensures that everyone gets their fair share of the wealth and prosperity generated. We know that democracy prospers in society based on equality, not of polarization. Where citizens engage in a strong social contract with each other, the EU motto, excellent, captures this sentiment. It's, as you all know, united in diversity. That is democracy. Here in Denmark, we strive towards the ideal that no matter our financial background, education, religion, or ethnic origin, we see the same doctors and live in the same vibrant neighborhoods that are diverse and inclusive, where our children go to the same schools and to the same kindergartens. We insist in an egalitarian society. We endeavor to make sure that we all have the same possibilities in life, and that our position in society is never predetermined by our parents' level of education or their size of their bank account. And that we have an obligation to one another as human beings. In short, we insist on being united in diversity, with respect of both the individual and the community. To me, as a social democrat, that is what I call lived democracy, which I so wholeheartedly believe in. So the Copenhagen criteria is to a large extent the formal expression of these values that secure democracy, equality, and the rule of law. But we must fill this with life if people are to support it, and they can never also take it for granted. If we politicians don't have the guts or the will to act when crisis hit, the institutions that exist to protect democracy could become the very root cause of their own demise. If politicians don't act decisively to protect and support those who trusted in us to represent them, we undermine the foundation of which the Copenhagen criteria are built and paving the way for populists and demagogues throughout Europe. While others, well, I want to say to you also today, we are here today and we are fighting every day, but we are working also tirelessly on political change, because if we do not stand together, we will not be strong enough. Democracy, just like politics, has for too many become an abstract. An ideal, yes, but an abstract nonetheless. A label where we put our societies without much further thought. An academic term, one could say. This slowly but surely undermines our democracy. The Washington Post has a famous motto, which is worth citing tonight, I think. Democracy dies in darkness. As chilling but true assessment, I could say. Democracy, just like politics, has to be practiced, exercised, and lived. In light of this conference, allow me to suggest another motto. Politics dies when it becomes an explanation instead of an action. For too long, politics in Europe has been an explanation for non-action, for status quo, a bad explanation of why we can't act. Friends, we intend to fight for democracy. This is our call to action. We have a battle plan. We know the issue and we have the solutions. So let's defend what Paul championed 25 years ago. And let's promise to meet again here in Copenhagen to celebrate in 25 years' time again a vibrant and lively democracy, inclusive society, and a Europe united in diversity. Thank you so much.
Tak for det, Jeppe.
Thank you, Jeppe. We've now come to the first of two keynote speakers. Former Prime Minister Poul Nyrup Rasmussen, Danish Prime Minister from 1993 to 2001. If you think back to the time when you started, it was an incredible time. It was 4 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. There were other big people, Bill Clinton, François Mitterrand, Helmut Kohl, also Tony Blair, all people who were very interested in the way Europe operated. You were the leader at the summit which led to the Copenhagen Declaration, and you've put your mark on that. You, the head of the Social Democrats in the European Parliament, and a lot more. So, welcome to Poul Nyrup Rasmussen.
Thanks a lot. So, guys, are you okay already? Right. Now, once upon a time, that was the famous Danish author Hans Christian Andersen's first fairy tale. You all recall that, right? But once upon a time, there was a summit in Copenhagen in 1993, as you recall. And to those of you who were there, I see that's not many, but I was there, and I can tell you that at that time, there were two important agenda points at the summit meeting in '93. Number one, unemployment. Don't miss the point. At that time, many governments, including my own, as a newborn prime minister, were fighting unemployment. This was the major theme, also at the European level. The second theme was the war in the Balkans, a terrible war, which of course also had to be dealt with from the Europeans at the European Council level. You know, all the guys you have been reading about were there. You know, Helmut Kohl. He sometimes said to me, Paul, you know, I don't like socialists, but you're one of the guys who, well, okay, acceptable, a little bit pragmatic, that's okay with me, he said. Jacques Delors were there, the big engineer and visionary around the next step of developing Europe, and many others were there. They were occupied with these two themes I just mentioned, and later on, late in the afternoon, we presented this new Copenhagen criteria catalog. You know, to be honest with you, I don't think that all the members around the table in the council realized how important it was. That's not a new phenomenon in history. Often you see back in story that you make decisions which show their importance years after. But at that time, I think it's fair to say that some of us felt, now this is only 4 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we don't know for sure what the old guys in Russia are going to do now. But we know that the newcomers in democracy and independent countries in Eastern Europe want to have their own life and their own independence. And beginning to think about that, logically, we came out with this Copenhagen criteria catalog. So I want tonight to say that I was not the only guy who were dealing with it. There was another Dane, the Danish foreign minister at that time, Niels Helveg Petersen, together with the ministry and good people over there who made an enormous job here. You know, one thing in politics is it's about blood, sweat, and tears, right? Which means, in a sense, that being a politician and a prime minister is, in some sense, easy when you talk about unemployment, fighting injustice, and so on and so forth. I will come to it. But talking about Copenhagen criteria, can you hear it? It's not a big seller, right? But it became a big seller, and in the years we realized how big the thing was. It was the very fundamental basis for enlarging Europe, which we had to do, and we did. As you know, in a short while, Europe was becoming +10 to the old ones, including my own country. But then, again, times changed. Feelings changed. Expectations changed. You know, not many years after the enlargement of the European Union, some begin to say to themselves, was it a good idea, really? Shouldn't we have waiting sometimes before we enlarged Europe? That was what the old ones said. The new ones, becoming members, said, they didn't give us all what we expected to get, right? And we don't want to become full member of a union of the kind we just left, right? So on both sides there was a peculiar situation which combined with a new development in Europe, in European economy, and in global economy. Because not few years after the enlargement, as you recall, it began to break. We begin to see the first sign of the financial bubble, and then populism and nationalism became growing larger and larger. It started in the Eastern European countries, but it spread, as you know, very fast to the rest of Europe, including the old DDR, Eastern Germany, which was also a good example of thinking what is the basis for populism and nationalism. Also in DDR, the old DDR in Eastern Germany, modern Germany now, they thought, what are we going to have as a result of unification and membership of the European Union? We're going to have jobs, we're going to have explosive increasing in income, we're going to have a happy life, better education, and so on and so forth, right? So this period was characterized by an enormous distance between ordinary people's expectations on the one hand and what really happened on the other hand. So, friends, I'm not among those who say, you ordinary people, you made big mistakes when you joined the populists or you don't join the extreme leftist. You have to come back to us. I think before saying that, you should try to understand what was really happening. I'm not the guy who feel I can blame ordinary families to think, well, these populists, they are saying something right. They are talking to me in a language I understand and about problems I think is really important. So guys, the challenge for us progressives is not to tell ordinary people you're dummies because you're populist and nationalist, but is to turn it the other way around and ask the simple question, why? Why do the populists have enormous, you could say, positive effects on themselves, and what is happening behind these things which are creating the basis for their success? That is, in a sense, that is the challenge. And just as we thought that the financial crisis, number one, 2007-8, was over, we saw, before we left that crisis, that the European Union's response to the crisis, you know, the crisis created mass unemployment. The crisis created 6, 7, 8 years of low standards. It's only now most of us have reached the same level as we had just before the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And again, ordinary people saw that the state and the governments they have elected in democracy, they used all their money to pay to the big banks to avoid that they were going bankrupt, right? And then they supplemented it with austerity, 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 right? And then the ordinary people ask themselves, what about me and my family? Well, the last thing we can expect is that those who created the financial crisis, the private equity, the hedge funds, the investment funds, the big bankers, that those guys were becoming responsible, that there was a judge and there was something to pay back. There was prisons if they had really made what they were accused to do. But nothing happened. Not one single guy was placed on a challenge of responsibility. So I can understand, I'm sorry friends, I can understand why people became desperate, why they at the first place became filled with apathy. I'm too small, this is too big, I have to stay home until it's over. And then secondly, lots of turmoil in politics. People are now changing political parties as they're changing their shirts. And that's quite often, I can confess, right? So a lot of those things happening here, we have to understand to find the right track back to fighting for democracy. I would add, in the right way, right? And now, are we on track? Well, it has been said, the Cumex files, organized fraud in all our European countries with excessive avoidance of paying taxes on profits you have gained by buying and selling shares. You know, some, including myself a bit, are beginning to ask, is it a good thing that so many foreigners are buying and selling Danish shares, right? Because the only thing we're getting out of it is that they avoid to pay tax to the Danish country. Now, I'm chilling a bit with you, but I'm only saying that this thinking is spreading around Europe now. Let's go back to our own nation, and let's keep our shares at ourselves, and let's say no to the globalization and the trade, right? So unless we do something, we, the progressives, unless we do something really radical, reforming, shaping the capitalism and shaping and reforming our markets, then this will be the development. Not that you love your countries. I do. I love my own and I love many other countries. That's not nationalism. Not that you want the words to be spoken as you understand them. That's not populism in my mind, but too few do it. So people, tax fraud, tax paradise, greed, and inequality. 1% of the richest in Europe are owing, I don't know how much. Yes, I do, but we're not talking so much about figures tonight. And 0.1 in US is owing more or less the same shares as 1% here. And then at the top of that, we are having a new phenomenon called the IT revolution, with two characters. The one is the echo chamber effect, which have been talking about here recently, which means that you can choose your truth as you like it, right? The rest is fake news, right? That 3 or 4 other echo chambers where others are discussing with themselves, this is fake, but my chamber, that's the truth, right? That is a paradise for all those who talk about nationalism and all those who talk about populism. This is a new marketplace for fake news, right? The second point, the second effect we have right now of the ET revolution is, yes, Google, Amazon, I mean, you know them all, Facebook and so on and so forth. This is a revolutionary new phenomena of the same kind as in the early 70s, where the Seven Sisters of all international companies make their break. You know, they hit us twice at that time. First in 1972, 1973, and second in 1979, 1980. Two oil crises which again hit us across continents and countries. This is the new power field here. I understand people, because we all wait, what's going to do, who's doing anything about it? Financial markets? No, not by themselves. Financial markets are having their golden age now. Even as good as it was just before the crisis in 2007-8. You know why? Because they can say, dear nations, just continue by being occupied only with one question, that is the migrant and refugee crisis, right? Please go ahead, focus on it. Use all your intellectual efforts on it, trying to survive, because this is the fear factor, and the fear factor is a very, very bad companion among progressives, as you know. So they are saying, oh, continue, more migrants to Europe, because then people and parliaments and politicians and governments will focus all their efforts there, and we, the financial market, we're going to fix the rest, right? So that's why when Mette was talking about the way to deal with migrant and refugees, it's very, very important to understand that she's talking about this crack here. She's understanding that if we progressives don't tackle the migrant crisis and the refugee crisis in such a way that, number one, we are still loyal to our human rights and our Copenhagen criteria, but number two, we are doing it in such a way that we can move away the fear factor. So it's double important to understand this policy which were just told to you. Now, that's another thing. Do you have 5 minutes more? Okay. That's another thing. What we have seen here is very important to understand also. That is the Trump thing, right? What we see in this era of the new American president is the final curtain have now been removed. What I'm talking about is, here you see a real populist, right? But at the same time, it's not an Mr. Anybody or Mr. Nobody. No. He's president for the most powerful nation in the world, United States of America. By the way, make America great again. In Finland right now, apropos, they say, "Rev America great again," right? But let's come back to the point here. You know, what we saw in Mr. Trump's pulling US out of the Iran deal by saying those who don't do as I would like other countries to do will be punished. When we make sanctions, I expect that others do the same. And if they don't, we'll come after you. Then Europe said, no, 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 no. We're the big guys, and we will do it ourselves. And Macron went into the top and said, we will support our national companies and European companies to break this sanction and to deal with Iran. Even the president of the Commission said the same, right? And some of you in the European Parliament applaud and say, yes, that's what we're going to do, right? You know what happened? No company in Europe dared to stand up against United States of America. No. They wanted to. Also the Danes, the big Danish chemistry companies and all others wanted to be solidaristic with Iran because we wanted to stand by our agreement with them. When they stepped down in their nuclear test and nuclear weapons, we would step up in our trade and aid. That's our historical knowledge. But the companies didn't follow. Why? There's a little thing you should recall here. The American dollar is the only reserve dollar of power in the world, right? And those who control the exchange mechanism for big banks, including national banks, that is the exchange office in Chicago, which decide at the end of the day where you as a big banker can get your credit in American dollars in the way you need to do. So in essence, you have to understand that now we see the long-term effects of a dominating and exclusive American dollar as the only reserve money we have in the world. And all these companies were told, including their banks, well, if you don't follow this sanction mechanism, we will come after you and begin to shut down our dollar deliverance, if you want to know. The second point we have to understand, which have been clear to us now with the Trump era, is the IT giants. I mentioned a few of them. You know about them? Facebook, Google, and so on. They're all Americans, right? Maybe someday some Chinese will come, but they're all Americans now. And the third thing is, the biggest and strongest military power in the world is the Americans. Now, I'm not talking about being anti-American. I'm talking about being weak in Europe. That's what I'm talking about. Because what we had to do to tackle this thing here should be, friends, to develop a stronger euro. We have all the means to create a reserve euro if we want to. We have the means to strengthen the European Central Bank if we want to. We have the means to make a whole new economic policy if we want to. Because we have the biggest market in the world. Well, after Brexit, it's a little smaller, but still it's quite powerful and attractive for every international firm and for the United States of America. So what I'm saying here is, looking at what happened, looking at the results of 30 years deregulation of financial market nationally and nothing internationally of alternative to have international regulation, makes where we are now. Therefore, what to do, right? What on earth to do? Well, Paul, it's of no use to talk of what to do unless you have something to do it, someone who can do it. And are we strong enough for the time being to be capable among progressives and social democrats and socialists to do it? Well, you know the answer. But I want to end my speech by starting at another way. When I came to power in 1993, I recall a meeting with Bill Clinton in New York together with Antonio Guterres, who's now, as you know, United Nations Secretary General. And we discussed there, I think it was in 93, how could we realize a common new European, American, progressive alliance and policy, right? We didn't reach many conclusions. And a couple of years later, we met again and said to each other that the reason why was that we were not prepared. We were not prepared. He was new, a US president, we were new, and we were really not prepared to see what is our working program now. What are we going to do? Which are the priorities? Which thing come first and which thing come next, and where should we start? It was quite new territory for us. It took us years, and while we tried to be more and more active, we lost more and more parties and leadership in our governments, and then the financial crisis came, and then you know the rest. So what I'm saying tonight is, fighting for democracy first, we should form a new, comprehensive European policy agenda to do that, right? And we should do it together. And let me just say, we have all the possibilities to do it. The single market, if you take the single market, let me come up with a few just concrete proposals. Number one, we could make a stronger control mechanism for tax fraud and for the CUMEX files and what you have by saying, we want to create a parallel to the Europol. We will have a European control mechanism which is so strong as we see in the Europol mechanism to fight crimes. Why not? And no member countries could keep her or his information for herself when you see that someone is making crimes on the financial market. There should be an obligation to exchange all the news so that we knew what's going on and what can continue. Number two, reshaping capitalism. I think it's simple in a sense. Take the single market. If we take the single market and say, for instance, every international company with a turnover of more than 1 billion euros should only have access to the single market if it fulfill a progressive CSR, corporate social responsibility, which means you live up to trade union standards, to ILO standards, you avoid to fix and avoid taxation, you pay your taxes, and so on and so forth. A real CSR combined as a passport to the single market, right? And at the same time say that public procurement should be legalized also as far as trade union claims are concerned. I have a lot of points, but the last and most important one perhaps could be, I'm an economist. I'm back to it again. How often have I been sitting as president of the PES of our own party when I was that in near 9 years, and shouting in my inner universe, they can't just go on by austerity and austerity and austerity. How can you tell the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Greeks who are really on their knees, you have to make further cuts? Or for that sake, also the Baltic countries, you have to make further cuts. We want to do our balance independent of what the others are doing. And you know, it didn't work. So that's why I want to change the Growth and Stability Pact, guys. We want to go beyond the GDP. We want to take climate, we want to take jobs, we want to take social inequality or quality. We want to take all the major important themes and put them together into that power room of economic policy, so that the next step you take in decision making on coordinated nature in growth and stability is a combination of the four most important things: politics, climate, social justice, and economics, right? That's not possible, Paul. Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it is. Because, you know, by accident or by miracle, I have just brought with me a little report, right? This report is made by the Independent Commission of Sustainable Equality by Progressive Society, initiated by the European Socialist Group in the European Parliament. It will be published in a week or so, and afterwards discussed at the PES Congress. So, why don't we start? The world is open to us. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think we all know the feeling that something we should not do, and then we do it. I know I should not ask questions because we are over time, but I cannot hold back. You mentioned in your speech, Paul Rasmussen, that we should not tell people not to vote for populist party. You had a certain understanding of them voting for populist parties. Back in 2000, you were among them isolating diplomatically the Austrian government because it included a far-right party, Freiheitspartei. What made you change your mind?
Then or now? Then? Now?
Now.
Are you sure I've changed my mind?
Well,
okay.
At the time, if you had followed the same line from 2000, you would have said, I will not talk to the Austrian government, not the Italian government. But now you say we should not deem the people for having voted for this.
Yeah, but you know, one thing is the people. Another thing is the political parties. There's a famous Danish quotation of what I've said about progressives, about populists here in my country. I'm not going to repeat it, but one of our major things is you have to separate between populists, leaders, and people. It's the people you should start with, asking yourself, why are the people supporting these populists? instead of saying these populists are bad ones and you who vote on them, you're also a bad guy, right?
Were you wrong back in 2000?
No, because at that time, you know, I think it's Willy Brandt who have said that every period of history have its own answers, right? And you indicated in your introduction. I think at that time, you should recall that the actual government in Austria was really asking Europe the following question: do you really mean seriously what you said in the Copenhagen criteria, right? Do you really respect the values that every individual counts, right? Because you're a human being, where you're red or black or white, that doesn't matter, that everybody counts. Do you really accept that extremism would not be accepted? That was the questions to the council. And if the council had said, no, let them be, let us go on. You know, the whole situation at that time was on the edge. Do we, in a credible way, are we linked to respect the values we're talking about? And Michael, right now you see Mr. Trump, he's now saying, I don't care about the values anymore. I mean, what I care about is to have some friendly nation to buy my stuff, from military equipment to everything else. So we have seen a United States where we have been used to since the Second World War and even backwards, that this wonderful country is balancing its international foreign political interest with its values, which are our values also. So you see, that was in a mini schedule the choice we had to do at that time also.
And then my last question is, you said maybe we did not know what we did in 1993 or the consequences when you formulated the Copenhagen criteria. Now we stand in a situation where we actually are talking about suspending Hungary and Poland from the European cooperation. If we do so, if EU does so, wouldn't that be extremely dangerous? Wouldn't that kind of underline the concept that many populist anti-EU politicians are drawing up, that EU decides who you can have for government, it's not you people?
First answer is it's not going to happen anyway. I mean, no matter how much the European Council's majority would like to exclude them and sanction them, it's not going to happen. Because this decision has to be unanimous. And Austria and others, Hungary and friends around, will vote against. Poland, for instance. So we're talking about, I'm sorry, but we're talking about a scenario which is anyway not going to happen, right? So what I'm trying to say is the why again. Why are the Hungarians voting on the guy who have the power now? Why are they accepting what's going on there? The why is important, instead of now we're going to sanction them. Of course, if we could, I would like to see some sanctions, right? But I'm not naive. I don't think that the Council can make a unanimously, because that's what it is about, decision, including Poland, to sanction this country.
But what is left of the Copenhagen criteria if we don't kick them out, if they are not in compliance with the criteria?
Oh, I mean, it's still alive. It's still alive. And if you're smart, and I think they're smart in the Commission, you will find ways. Not in the kind we're talking about right now, but you will find ways of other types of sanctions, so that the Hungarian government will know that we are going too far.
Thank you very much. Shouldn't we give Poul Nyrup Rasmussen a hand? Thank you very much. Next keynote speaker has costed me a fortune. He wrote a book, The People versus Democracy. I read it, and I ordered 5 more of them, and I'm gonna order even 5 more of them for Christmas presents. Yascha Mounk, you are the next key speaker. Please come up here. You are with the Harvard University now. You also have a relation to Denmark, I know, family-wise. But first of all, you wrote this fantastic book, People versus Democracy, where you are actually talking about a new model of democracy which is challenging the liberal democracy, and that is illiberal democracy, which has 2 forms. One is the Polish-Hungarian model in your book. That is democracy without any rights. And then there's the Greek model, that is rights without democracy. So I hope you'll come into that in your presentation. Welcome to Copenhagen, back to Copenhagen.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I just want to say that I already have a bone to pick with the organizers, because when they asked me to do a keynote, they didn't tell me that I would have to follow 3 such excellent acts. And I would never have agreed to this speech if I knew how difficult an act it was to follow. The other thing I want to say is that as somebody who joined, growing up in Germany, the Social Democratic Party at the age of 13, it's a particular honor to be here speaking to the European Social Democrats. As somebody who left the party 2 years ago, it's also a particular surprise. And so I feel a little bit like I'm hanging out with my ex. And you know how that tends to go. For the first half an hour, for the first hour, you think, why ever did I leave? And then often 4 or 5 hours in, you think, oh, I understand exactly why I left. But we haven't gotten to that stage of the evening yet. I want to talk about 3 things today. The first thing is why I do think that liberal democracy is acutely threatened by populism at the moment around the world, but also in the heart of Europe. The second thing to this audience is an analysis of why I think that social democratic parties are in crisis in so many European countries. And then the third is how it is that we should respond to that. How it is that social democratic parties should reform themselves in order to better be able to fight for democracy against the rise of liberal politics. So, not 25 years ago, but 60-something years ago, Winston Churchill held a famous speech in Fulton, Missouri, in which he warned that an iron curtain was descending across the heart of Europe, from Stettin in the Baltic all the way down to Trieste in the Adriatic. And one of the striking facts about European politics right now is that you can drive along that iron curtain today, and you can continue down on the west side down to Bari, or on the east side down to Athens, and never leave a country ruled by populists. We have seen over the last 18 years the average vote share of populists go from about 8% to about 26%. They used to be in about 7 governments, they're now in 15 governments. The share of a population that is ruled by them has exploded. And I think that the rise of this populism is challenging in deep ways the 2 fundamental values of liberal democracy. Because it's worth thinking for a moment about what it is that the Copenhagen criteria we're actually trying to defend, what it is that our political system tries to do. Why it is that we call it a liberal democracy, because I think this is a group of social democrats, not a representative of ALDE in the European Parliament. So why is it that we talk about liberal democracy? It's because our political system wants to represent 2 basic things. It wants to make sure that we have individual freedom, that we ourselves decide what we want to say and what we don't want to say, which God we want to worship or whether we want to worship at all, how to lead our private lives. And in order to sustain those individual liberties, we need a couple of things. We need rights, human rights, minority rights, but we also need the rule of law. Because unless we have independent institutions, unless we have checks and balances, a prime minister or a president who doesn't like what we say can decide to throw us in jail. So that's the first part of our political system. The second, obviously, is the democratic element. It's the rule of the people. It's that we rule ourselves. It's that there's not a dictator. It's that there's not a monarch or a priest or an army general who decides what our laws should be and what should happen politically, but that all of us together make those decisions. So why is it that populists threaten liberal democracy? What is it that we mean when we talk about populists? Well, it's important to take apart ideology and whether or not somebody is a populist. If you just look at ideology, then populists don't have a lot in common. Cinque Stelle and the Lega in Italy don't have a lot in common on ideology. Hugo Chavez is a very different kind of politician from Donald Trump. What do they have in common? What they have in common is a conception of politics. where they say, you know what, the only reason, not one of the reasons, the only real reason why you have political problems at the moment, why you're unhappy in your life, why things are going wrong in this country, is that the political elite is corrupt and self-serving, that they care more about themselves or about minorities within your country or about immigrants outside of the country than they care about people like you and me. And so what we need in order to solve this problem is just for somebody who truly speaks for the people, somebody who really speaks common sense to get elected. And the thing about them is not just that they have understood something about people's worries and people's fears more clearly than other politicians. It's not just that they think they're going to do a better job than somebody else. That's a normal part of politics. Everybody says that to get elected, even you guys, right? But what they say is that they alone stand for the people. They alone represent the people. And so everybody who disagrees with them isn't just wrong, they're not just going to do a less good job, they're illegitimate. That's the crucial part of populism, whether it's left populism or right populism. And so what the populists do once they get in office is relatively straightforward. In the first step, they often start to victimize the minorities, the outsiders, who they've criticized all along. But they go a step further than that. When the opposition does its normal work and tries to block some legislation, tries to point out its flaws, they say not that this is a legitimate part of a democratic process, but rather that the opposition are traitors, as Donald Trump has said in the United States. When the media criticize them, when they uncover scandals, when they show that they promised to be less corrupt but actually ended up being just as corrupt as their predecessors or much more corrupt, they say that this is fake news, that the media are legitimate, that they need to be regulated, that the heads of the state television channels need to be substituted, that they need to be censored and controlled. And when courts, when independent institutions do the normal work of checking what the government does when it oversteps the bounds of its rightful authority, they say that they are the enemies of the people. And so what happens once populists take power? Well, two things happen. First, we lose our freedom. You lose the freedom of speech. You no longer have a rule of law. Minorities get victimized. But once all of that has happened, in the next step, democracy itself as well. And we've seen that in Hungary. Because once Viktor Orban managed to take control of a country's electoral commission, once he had placed his loyalists on the Supreme Court, once he had taken control of the electoral commission and gerrymandered the political system, once he had turned state media into propaganda outlets and forced the sale of private media outlets into the hands of his adversaries, it was no longer possible to have free and fair elections. Even the OSCE, which is usually pretty diplomatic, acknowledged that the elections in Hungary earlier this year were not fair. They were mostly free, not entirely. They were no longer fair. So what we've seen now within the European Union is the transition of a country from liberal democracy to illiberal democracy to, let's call it by its name, an elected dictatorship. So those are the stakes we're facing right now. So what should we do about that? And what should you specifically as Social Democrats do about that? Well, to answer that question, I think first we have to understand why it is that Social Democrats in most countries are not as strong today as they were 30 or 40 years ago. And I think that there's a set of deep sociological reasons for that. Social Democrats have always done well when they've managed to hold together two very different constituencies. When they managed to speak for workers who often didn't have university educations, who perhaps had somewhat less liberal cultural attitudes, who were members of unions and so on, and for the most educated people in the countries, often the people living in the big cities, people who might be teachers or who might be academics or who might be civil servants, who might be artists, that kind of milieu. So why is it that Social Democrats were able to do that 30, 40 years ago? For two reasons. First, because the most important dividing line of politics was economic, and those groups had more similar economic interests than the most affluent in the society, so you could have some kind of bridge between them. And second, because of biographical reasons. there was a huge expansion of the middle class in the 60s and 70s. And so a lot of the people who were teachers in Copenhagen had parents who had been workers in the industrial areas. So to them, they were social democrats in part out of an inherited family solidarity, because they actually were close to workers in their own biography. Well, neither of these things are true anymore today. Today, for most young people who are university students in Copenhagen and so on, it's probably 2 generations, perhaps 3 generations, since they had somebody in their family who was actually a worker in a trade union in a steel factory or something like that. And today, the most important dividing line of politics, whether we like it or not, is cultural rather than economic. That really is what determines who somebody is likely to vote for. And so what you get, especially in systems of proportional representation, is that you get far-right populists who make a claim to the old proletariat on cultural grounds. You get new left parties, like the Greens in Germany, who make a strong play for the culture, the educated bourgeoisie in the big cities, with an uncompromisingly open-to-the-world attitude. And the Social Democrats are in the middle, getting split. They're trying to cover both bases, but half of their electorate runs away with the populists and the other half runs away with Green parties and other left-wing parties. That's the situation we're in, right? So how do we respond? How should Social Democrats respond? Well, I've heard some things today from the previous speakers that made me very hopeful, and some which made me quite worried. I want to lay out both of those things. I think the first thing to understand is that you're going to lose the fight to keep the educated bourgeoisie on your side. Green parties, new left parties, lifestyle parties are always going to be more effective at appealing to that 20-25% of European populations that has no concerns at all about migration and refugees. That in a very genuine way is international, that's actually lived abroad, that prefers to go out for Indonesian or Indian or Chinese food than for Danish or German food. Not just every now and again, but most days. That is an important part of a population. Most of us probably belong to that part of a population in one way or another. I do. But I think that Green parties, left parties are always going to have an easier time appealing to them than Social Democrats. And by the way, that's not an important part of the electorate. Why? Because they're never going to go vote for the populists. Right? It doesn't in the end matter when you think about defending democracy whether they vote for the Green Party or the Social Democrats. They're not going to be tempted away to the far-right populists. So they're the less important prize from the perspective of defending our institutions. Okay, so what about the other group? That group is underserved in our politics at the moment. And I think it makes sense strategically for Social Democrats, and it makes sense in terms of saving our institutions to make a clear appeal to those groups, because they are deciding between staying loyal to the Social Democratic Party, returning to the Social Democratic Party, or going over to the far-right populists. That is an incredibly important question for the fate of our democracies, which way they jump. And so I think that Social Democrats, like the Danish Social Democratic Party, are right to try and make a very clear appeal to that group. How do you do that? I think you do it by 2 things. The first is that you cannot ignore the thing that drives them, and that is more cultural than it is economic a lot of the time. You have to speak clearly, with common sense, with honesty, about some of the challenges that migration brings to our societies, about your will to ensure that you have control of your own borders, that you get to know and decide who comes in, and that you're going to preserve the basic standards of a liberal and a multi-ethnic society. And that means that if there is a native Dane or a native German who goes and beats up a newcomer or an immigrant, or if they put fire to an apartment which is destined for immigrants, as one German civil servant did, You don't say you don't get a single day in prison and you can go and resume your public job. You make sure that they're actually punished. But in the same way, if there are people coming into your society and they systematically break the rules of that society, they too are punished and held to account. So that's the first thing that you have to do. The second thing you have to do is on the economy to speak common sense, which means that most workers today are proud of what they've achieved, of the jobs they have. They're not interested in what some of the further left parties in European societies are talking about. They don't want to abolish capitalism. They don't want to abolish free trade. But they also want to make sure that there's a political will to make sure that the benefits of capitalism and the benefits of free trade actually go to ordinary citizens. That, as some of my previous speakers were emphasizing, we're not going to let people hide the money in tax havens. That if you grew up and were raised in Denmark and made your money here, you can't decide to spend 200 days a year on a beach in the Bahamas and therefore not pay any tax in this country. That Apple and Google should obviously come and sell their services and their products here because they make our lives better, but they also need to pay a minimum of their tax in Denmark on the revenues that they have in this country. I think if you speak about that in a clear way, then people realize that it's not a choice between politicians standing up to them and globalization. We can embrace globalization, we can embrace free trade, while standing up for ordinary people and making sure that they benefit from all of those things. All right, so on that we agreed. Let me also make very clear what Social Democrats shouldn't do. Because I do think that there's a danger that in trying to pursue that electorate, and trying to speak common sense on culture and on the economy, we think of this as a question of one-dimensional political space. We think that we were here and the populists are there, and in order to reach the voters who are tempted by the populists, we have to move along this one-dimensional space. Because then we'll start to emulate the populists and to copy them, and we start to give up on our own principles. Most citizens still have a real attachment to liberal democracy. They want to be tolerant. They have nothing against immigrants or foreigners in itself. They're not bigoted. They just want to make sure that we stand up for the rules of our society and that we manage the transitions in our society. And that means that when we take a tough stance on the things in which our principles indicate that we should take a tough stance, like people who don't accept the basic rules of a multi-ethnic society, then we can also stand up for our principles without losing their support. And that means that we have to be very careful about copying the rhetorical playbook of populists. And I'm no expert on Danish politics, but when I hear, for example, that one former government minister suggests that Muslims should not be allowed to work in public functions during Ramadan because the fact that they haven't eaten for a few hours might somehow cause traffic accidents. When I read that the Social Democratic Party seems to support the idea of applying different criminal punishments to people depending on where the place of residence is, that's not taking the fight of the populists. That's running the danger of becoming like the populists. And we shouldn't do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasha. We are coming back to you in a panel later on, so I will leave the questions for later on.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much. Now I shall welcome a panel, and I hope some will bring up some chairs here. The first panel is headlined Guaranteeing Democracy, Copenhagen Criteria. And I shall welcome Tamas Borders. Where is Tamas Borders? He's coming here. Tamas Borders is a member of Foundation for European Progressive Studies, Scientific Council and co-director of the Hungarian Foundation for Policy Solutions. Then Maria Skora, coming here. Originally from Poland, doctor in economy. You have been studying also here in Denmark and is now living in Germany, where you are a senior project manager for Dialogue on Europe in the think tank Das Progressive Zentrum And you have been focusing on Central and Middle Europe. Yes, that's what I should have said. Thank you very much. And Kata Toto, are you already there? Also an economist, a member of the European Committee of the Regions, local councillor in Budapest. You have not been in Denmark, so you have not been living in Denmark, as I know. No, you have. Welcome to all of you. This panel, I hope, is not only about diagnosing what has gone wrong in Eastern and Central Europe, it's also about suggesting solutions. And that is my first questions to you. What we have agreed is all of you will have like a 2-minute presentation, introduction, and then we have some discussions. Two together ambassadors, Tamas Vas and Pedro Diogo, who will ask questions afterwards, and then we leave the floor for you, and you can ask questions to the panel. But first of all, should we start with Maria?
With Poland.
Yeah, why not?
Well, good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation to Syntac. And I'm very happy to be here. And also because I've heard the names of our two countries, Hungary and Poland, very often today, and rightfully so. Things are not going super well in neither of them. However, I hope that this panel will help us understand better what is actually going on, because the situation is not necessarily so black and white. And, well, I'll start with the fact that, Poland and Hungary, of course, used to meet the Copenhagen criteria, and that's why they managed to be admitted to the club of the European Union. They are member states since quite a few years now, 14. And at the same time, recently, a democratic backsliding has been going on in both of them. Hungarian government and Polish government are introducing measures which are sometimes very similar, like in case of the judiciary, and sometimes different. It's not that they're copycats. But at the end of the day, we end up in a situation when Europe has, a problem with both of them. And we've seen the European Union trying to tackle the situation. Article 7 has been triggered not only against Hungary, but also Poland, actually first against Poland, paradoxically, because the Polish government has been in place for much shorter than Viktor Orban, who's doing his third term right now. But I have a feeling, and it has been also mentioned today, that the Article 7 seems to be a toothless tiger, because it doesn't really seem to work. Neither has it scared off the political elites in both countries, nor has it really a chance of succeeding because of the political dynamics of powers in the European Union. So, okay, this doesn't really work. The other issue is that to tackle both Poland and Hungary, ideas like combining rule of law with structural fund has been brought. And so if the values do not speak, maybe the money will be speaking enough. However, I'm not so sure if it's a good idea, because it probably would damage the most local democracy, because it's actually the local governments that are dependent on European money. And if there is no support from that side, then dependence on central governments increases. And then I've learned recently in Hungary, and maybe we will also speak about it, that also the Office of European Public Prosecutor is seen as a maybe chance of curbing corruption, and maybe hence curbing especially the Hungarian government and these circles. And, well, yeah, okay, there are ideas what to do, what the European Union could possibly implement to manage the situation. But you know what? I don't think that the European Union is exactly the actor that should tackle the domestic problems of Poland and Hungary. It's not a watchdog organization. It's not a policeman. I'm very convinced about the fact that we should deal with the problem of Polish government and Hungarian government in Poland and Hungary. We social democrats, or democrats and socialists maybe, we should deliver an agenda that would prevent people from voting for this kind of politicians. Because let's remember, Orban or Kaczynski, they have not seized power through coup d'etat. They were elected in a democratic process, and that's the problem, that people vote for such parties and for such very charismatic political leaders, despite the fact that they are not playing by the rules, that they are cynical, that they are putting both of our countries in this very unfortunate position that our societies are seen as black and white, whereas they are not. There is opposition. There are people who are not agreeing with the governments and what has been going on, and we need to support them, and we should also offer the agenda to counterbalance the populists, to counterbalance the right-wing tide in Europe. And my last point is, well, Hungary and Poland are relatively young democracies, and young democracies are maybe vulnerable, and such things maybe happen in young democracies that, I don't think that framing the discussion about Poland and Hungary and the rule of law and the problems with it in these countries and how Europe should tackle it, framing it as an Eastern European problem is right. Such things can happen wherever. And perhaps now it's, you know, a shock factor, and no one wants to be associated with Orban and Kaczynski. But you know, when it's gone, who knows if similar measures won't be implemented by other right-wing populist governments. You know, it's a playbook. And in Germany, we have the AfD, who is, for example, growing in power. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they would be interested in such scenarios. So my point is, let's not think about the context, but think about the content. And let's not focus on these two case studies as the problem of these two countries. Let's think about a robust and responsible social democratic agenda that would exactly prevent from populist parties from gaining popularity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thomas Boros, maybe you will pick up, yeah. Maybe you'll pick up from here. I noticed that Maria said it's not up to EU to decide who the people should elect, but is it not up to EU to decide when you're not in compliance in Hungary, where you are from, is not in compliance with basic EU values, shouldn't they act? Because what is really left of EU if we do not?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here. Well, basically, I'm a practical guy, and my question is not whether it's up to the EU, but whether it will be effective if it's the EU that deals with this question, and whether it's effective and will help Hungary if the EU starts triggering the Article 7, if there will be a decision in the Council, as it was mentioned beforehand. This decision will not be made because it should be a unanimous decision, and it won't happen. So when I ask this question, what can be done, I come from another perspective, which is what can be really done, what will really help Hungary. And if just very quickly I can tell you a short story to understand what I think could be done. Let me tell you that this short story that almost each year big investors from London and New York come to Hungary to look around in Central and Eastern Europe to gather information about the economy, the political trends. They are really the biggest investors with assets of hundreds and billions of US dollars. And time to time, they ask me to present the situation, the political situation in Hungary. And when I talk with them and I speak with them about the breach of the rule of law, what's going on with the illiberal democracy, what's going on with the propaganda campaigns of the government in the public media, all these attacks against the EU, they are very, very shocked and very, very moved. They say that it's incredible what's going on. Well, they say it as a private individual. But they also say that when they go back to London and New York, they will they will do advise to invest in Hungary. Because otherwise, Hungary is an economic and investment paradise with low corporate tax rate, one of the lowest in the EU. We have GDP growth, and if you have a good deal with the prime minister, you can invest very well, and you get a lot of money. So basically, I think one of the biggest problems here is that as private individuals, a lot of people are shocked what's going on in Hungary and in Poland. But if you have some economic interest in this region, if you have some economic interest in Hungary and Poland and other countries, then you love these countries. So the biggest bluff, I think, of the populists is that they speak against the economic elite. They speak on behalf of the people, but actually they are making deals with the economic elite. So I think the solution is how we can stop coming and receiving this easy money. And also EU funds are easy money. So this money helping the government to survive. This money actually, what they do is helping ideologically Orban, because he says that you don't need liberal democracy, because in liberal democracy we had economic crisis. Now we have illiberal democracy and we have GDP growth. So people don't understand that this easy money, which is coming from the EU, is actually doesn't reflect the real performance of the country. So I think money is very important, and it's very important that EU money should be conditional, because otherwise nobody would understand why would we choose a liberal democracy and not an illiberal democracy if you can have a flourishing country in an illiberal democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I can just jump in.
You will just jump in, I guess.
I would just jump in. While I was listening to Poul Rasmussen, I was having this feeling that how much I miss him from the Party of the European Socialists. Really. I have to tell you, it's a really bad feeling when you sit in an audience and your country is being called on and pointed a finger at it. I'm here representing the Hungarians and not Viktor Orban. We wear this in Hungary, and we state with it that we Hungarians are in the heart of Europe, and Europe is in our hearts. And this is our position. Shutting out, closing out Hungary or Poland will not solve any of our problems. None of the Europeans' problems. It's like an orthodox way of thinking of medicine. Like if you see one organ dysfunctioning, you cut it out and you believe that, okay, my problem is out. You have to see the patterns. You were talking about populism rising, and it doesn't come from Hungary. We have to understand why populism is rising, why 1 out of 4 European voters are voting on populist parties, and how this will change our Europe we know. It's not the Copenhagen criteria we have to worry about today. It's the next elections, next May, when we will have much more right-wing populists in the European Parliament, and they want to change the Europe we know in a way we don't want to change it. What I see is from a social democratic perspective, is that we don't have our story. We see the reality coming. In Hungary, Viktor Orban is not talking about illiberal democracy anymore. He's talking about Christian democracy. He went to the cultural battle. Now the agenda is that he is the gatekeeper of Europe, protecting the known values, the Christian values, based on families of men and women. We Social Democrats know what's coming, and we're not talking about the reality because it seems so frightening. So what we need is credible, brave politicians who will tell everyone that, yes, there is a wave coming. You can feel it. You don't see it yet, but you feel it. We know it's coming. But we can go through in a way that nobody will drift away, nobody will taken away by a current, because we will hold your hand and go through. This is a way we can approach it.
Thank you very much. And then we have two together ambassadors as discussants. And one, I said a wrong name before because we had a change in the panel. One is Dylan Casey Marshall. And would you be the first one to comment on what you just heard? Yes, you'll have a mic. It's coming.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Dylan Casey Marshall. I'm a European ambassador. And I'm wondering that, do you think that I got the impression that you don't think the institutional approach at the European level is very effective, because obviously Article 7 is not going to pass in the European Council. And I'm wondering what you think we can do to engage more young people with social democracy. And we've seen in polls, particularly in Poland, the age group of 18 to 25 overwhelmingly support the ruling party. And then the second highest support is for an even further right party. And it's below 1% for the Social Democrats. So what do you think we can do? Can we promote education? These people don't remember the dictatorships of the past. They have lost the connection with that. And I'm wondering, the EU has very limited competence to legislate in education and promote these kind of education initiatives. So what do you think we can do to support and engage with young people?
We'll take that one.
Well, yes. I have a lot of ideas how to support, but how to engage, that is the problem. That is, we are talking about a lot. I don't think that young voters can be bought by money. I mean, like promising free education, free healthcare. We need our story, which they can emotionally connect to. This is the thing we are looking for. But for this, we need those credible politicians who can present these stories.
Anyone who wants to? Yes, Maria?
I can try. Thank you for this question. It's a big one, and I'm not sure if I can answer fully. But since you referred to Poland, that's true. Young people in Poland, as we've learned from election results 2015, these youngest voters, in fact, voted for right-wing populists, or the Peace Party, and only then for liberals, and maybe at the end of the day for left-wing actors. But I think, in particular in Poland, the problem with the left is that it is very often associated with the former regime, with communism. And when people think left, some of them, they think communism, real socialism, which is not the case, of course. And the other issue, I think, in the Polish case, it is fashionable to be conservative right-wing. It is fashionable to the extent that you can even merchandise that. Can you imagine that in Poland we have patriotic fashion? You can buy items which are patriotic with national symbols, flags, and you see them on every occasion. People wear T-shirts, people have, I don't know, bed sheets at home. Even you could buy something, a clothes for your dog to be a little patriot. So, I mean, it's funny, it's ridiculous, but it's also scary how you can influence people by making, well, basically nationalism sexy, and how you can mainstream it into popular culture. And I think we missed out on that and mainstreaming the progressive agenda. Well, maybe not. Actually, the techno version of Bella Ciao, I think, was a fantastic thing. And don't get me wrong, and don't think I'm cynical, but this is also part of political work, to mainstream the ideas. And if art and culture or pop culture is the way to do it in a responsible way, right? Not in a populist way or manipulative way, then maybe that's the way how one can appeal to young people. But yeah, you're young people. I mean, you can answer if I'm right.
Section nationalism is certainly a word I'll take home. Thomas, you have a comment?
You asked about the institutional approach, or if the EU as an institution can do something. I think more or less we agreed that if you mean by this institutional approach, if you mean Article 7 as an institutional approach, I don't believe in it. I think the others don't believe it either. But I think controlling how EU money is used and controlling that that EU money helps both ideologically and financially building populist or illiberal regimes in the EU is possible, and this is also an institutional approach, just totally another one, so not based on legal procedures and sorry, but useless fights in the European Parliament, but actual steps which can show that that illiberal democracies are not sustainable if there is no external help. So I believe in an institutional approach, but based on money. And concerning young people, especially in Hungary, there are several segments which actually offers kind of a catch-22 situation. Is basically these countries are aging societies much more than most Western European countries. We don't have migration, plus it's an aging society with much less children than other countries. So it is the most essential thing for parties to offer solutions for old people or older people. Without them, you cannot win an election, and it's very, very hard how you can combine these two. And if you want to go for an easier solution, and as you are a politician, it's absolutely essential that you want to have more voters, you start with older people, unfortunately. So it's not easy in Hungary. But there is one thing which I think is also important. There are no big differences between the demands or the needs of young people and old people in a lot of cases, or older people. So jobs and housing questions are also the top concerns, and healthcare, and also the top concerns, both young people and older generations.
Let's give the floor to our second together ambassador, Pedro Diego. Yeah, you'll have a microphone. It's coming. You'll have mine.
So my name is Pedro. I come from Portugal. I will take a broader view on this guaranteeing democracy and Copenhagen criteria. I believe that Europe nowadays is facing several challenges: the migrant crisis, the environmental and climate change crisis, and also a rise in inequality and power of big corporations. And I believe the Copenhagen criteria should adapt to this. And don't you think that, for example, the inclusion of some environmental criteria and also antitrust laws would be important for guaranteeing and reinforcing democracy in the European Union?
Yeah, I think it's essential that the social democratic parties should go back to their own agenda. So speaking about migration, speaking about the quintessential topics of the right would, I think, lead nowhere. So what you just mentioned, like the antitrust legislatives, is very important. And if I can go back to my home country, to Hungary, it is also very important, not just from economic reasons, but from democratic reasons as well, because in Hungary, these monopolies are not just multinational monopolies, but monopolies that are linked to the government. So you can see monopolies in media. There is no real media pluralism in Hungary anymore. So if you fight against these monopolies, you both fight against them economically, but also it's very helpful for the democracy as well.
If anyone out there wants to pose a question, it's you're very welcome. You'll have a microphone. It's coming rapidly from all sides. Yeah.
It's very short, actually. It's about the strategic military situation. When we have these discussions in Denmark, in my circles anyway, the question arises, will it affect the strategic military position towards Russia? Are there a danger that the Eastern European countries under these regimes will drift back towards Russia, and Russia will have allies there, or these authoritarian regimes will find their footsteps together? Thank you.
Who will go on that? Maria.
Hi, I'll start. Yeah, you know, I'm Polish, and Poland has a very particular stance on Russia. It's pretty hysteric, I would say. I cannot speak for other countries, but the Polish case is very specific because of of historical circumstances, and also the older one, but also very recent ones like the catastrophe in Smolensk, 2010. When 96 passengers of a presidential plane were killed in an accident, in a catastrophe, which by some circles is still considered to be a assassination, orchestrated by Putin and Donald Tusk, however strange that might seem. And the Peace Party, the party that is currently in government, in their most radical circles, they are really feeding on that theory. However, I strongly also want to stress that it's a minority, however it lives. But I don't think that Poland or the Polish government would ever get closer to Russia, not only by this, but also because they are in intensive exchange with the Trump administration upon building a military base in Poland called Fort Trump, of course. So I think I'm very curious what my Hungarian colleagues will have to say, because the Hungarian approach, or Viktor Orban's approach to Russia, is far more different. But I wouldn't see this as a feasible scenario from the Polish perspective.
So stay calm. They will not ally with Putin. They will ally with Trump. We are calm.
Well, the 20th century hit hard the Hungarian society. 2 World Wars, a lot of losses, revolutions, bloody retributions, and a long Russian occupation. It's not gone yet from the people's mind. I also lived in that period. So even if Viktor Orban is doing business with Vladimir Putin, he doesn't do anything which is not supported by the majority of the Hungarians. So the Hungarians would never support this sort of alliance with Russia.
Kaza, will that also go for the young people? As I think I mentioned, I liked Yascha Monk's books very much, and he's describing actually how youngsters are rapidly forgetting their past. So many more, and that is in America, so many more are now believing that military rule might not be that bad like it was in older generations. So do you think that could change rapidly among generations?
Of course, everything can change with really strong propaganda, but I don't think that the under-30s are so affected by the state propaganda, so they have different ways of communication. And you know, what I always learn from like my son's generation, that they are really good in this, filtering 99% of the information coming in, so it's not so easy. And our young people are pro-Europeans, and they will stay pro-Europeans.
Thomas?
I think it's very important to differentiate between the Hungarian government and the Hungarian people in that regard, because 99% as a good old populist government, they try to do what the relative majority asks them to do. In terms of Russia, we conducted opinion polls, and around 3% of the Hungarian population sees Russia as an idol or as a potential alliance. 3. So I don't think it could be possible even in the longer term that Hungary and Russia can be an open ally. However, what's going on is the Hungarian population is having this in-between atmosphere or in-between mindset. So we shouldn't be, of course, be in the East, because that's terrible. So they hate what's going on in those regions. But there are so many problems in the West, so we should go our own way. So just as many people, Hungarian people, believe that we should resemble or kind of copy the West, is just the same as those people who say that we should go our own way. But still, the overwhelming majority of the Hungarians would like to stay in the European Union. So as far as I know, we are more pro-European than the Danish. Of course, that's not what you read in the newspaper, because the government is not, but the people are, depending on which survey you see, but more than 70% of the people would stay in the EU. In that regard, of course, there are big differences. But the government, as Kata mentioned, they do deals with Putin, and usually deals are not that crystal clear, so we don't know how they will behave. I think it's important for Viktor Orban to be as independent as possible, and he believes that he can outsmart both the EU and Putin, and can have deals and money from both sides, which can create for him a kind of liberty or freedom, because if you are dependent from one side, you get money and legitimation, everything from one side, you are dependent. So I think he tries to do this deal with Putin, which can be dangerous, I think, if there is some kind of conflict. But the Hungarian people are not pro-Russia at all.
Thank you very much. And we take the last question from down here. Can we have a microphone down here? Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that in this connecting with the fantastic lecture by Yasha Young from Harvard University, if we have to change this, discourse, debate, the rise of populist parties, if I understand him correctly, while he was debating with the Indian professor in BBC who was giving him a hard time, Cambridge University, saying that, we can talk positively about nationalism. So how do we change this debate? For a few years ago, we thought it's the economy stupid. I think I'm getting this impression that it's the culture stupid. Now it's about discussing and creating a new discourse about European culture. So how do we do this? Is it possible to create a new discourse on culture where Hungary and Poland and all could be part of it, instead of this divisive? I think this is the biggest problem I see in the Western world, coming from a non-Western world, is this absolutely unimaginable polarized society where grandparents are not able to talk with grandchildren, husband, wives are getting unfriendly, right from United States to here. So what is the solution? How do we create this new cultural, political discourse? Thank you.
An inclusive nationalism, is that what you say? Anyone has a response to that? Well, look at each other. We can stay here for an hour while you're playing the game.
It wasn't the easiest question ever. I also read a lot about this, what you mentioned, inclusive nationalism or patriotism, and actually what I heard in the beginning of this conference from Danish politicians is something similar. So when they said about or told about that they are proud to be Danish, but they are also proud to be European, is something very different than what you usually hear from not inclusive but exclusive nationalist politicians. But in politics, you usually need some kind of enemies. So from political point of view, I understand this East-West divide because it's, you know, it's easier when you don't have your own agenda that you find some enemies and speak and categorize yourself against somebody. So it's sometimes useful for politicians, and it's part of politics, so I can accept this. But of course, I'm also more for a more inclusive rhetoric.
You want to add something, Maria?
Yeah, I would approach this question by inviting good old Karl Marx and speaking about base and superstructure. Well, you know, Poland and Hungary actually were in that Euro enthusiastic club before the governments changed, right? And I would say that if you keep on repeating people that Europe is great because it's liberal, it has free market, and we all live in a welfare, which is true. However, from Eastern European or Eastern member states perspective, you see that you're still some kind of second category because you earn less and the inequalities are still there. We haven't yet reached the convergence in the EU, and that you still have to go west to earn more money to have a decent life at home. Then I guess you might be frustrated, and maybe then you might lose faith that actually, even though objectively the living conditions in all new member states have improved tremendously over the last 14 years, they are still not equal to Denmark or to Germany. And maybe this is also how why this inner frustration in some parts of the societies that have not benefited from the membership in the European Union as if, in the way that they would hope for, to the scale that they would hope for. Maybe that's what made them prone to buy this anti-EU or Eurosceptic or nationalistic agenda. I'm not claiming it's the universal rule. However, maybe that's an explanation to part of it. And then I think the inequalities that they produced maybe people prone to this kind of ideologies or rhetorics, and maybe we should start with in more social Europe or more or less austerity and less neoliberalism in our countries, because after all, Poland, it was Donald Tusk who lost completely against the Peace Party in the last elections, and it was Donald Tusk's government that introduced a big flexibilization of the labor market, and so on and so on. So maybe it is actually economy stupid, but definitely also in this cultural superstructure, which is also very important. So the narrative.
It's just the whole discussion reminded me that for long years, we politicians, like Central Eastern politicians, were trained by a lot of think tanks that how to counteract populism. And we were told that you have to give them the facts, give people the facts. And if you give people the facts, they will know. You give them numbers and they will believe you. But what we've seen is that all populism, especially creating fear, emotions trend much, much faster and much, much better than facts and numbers. So we failed with that thing we were taught for many, many years. But to go on the positive side, there was an intellectual gap for social democratic a new economy, but I think that gap is filled now. So we have now great books about rethinking capitalism for a more inclusive and green and sustainable Europe. I think we have those. Now it's time to choose a candidate, and we will be going to Lisbon, many of us, and choose a face, hopefully, who will personalize and tell our story of this new economy.
I'll allow myself to ask a direct question to you, Maria, to something you pointed out before. You were not too fond about the Article 7 idea. That was not, I think you said, that is not how we solve Poland's problem by being suspended from EU. I wonder, what is left of EU if EU is not even standing up for the Copenhagen criteria which we're celebrating today? What is left?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not of the opinion that the EU should tolerate and not react. Yes, of course, it should. But to tackle the reasons why this kind of governments are elected, then it's not the EU's responsibility to engage with the citizen in national states and member states and to present them with alternative agendas, with alternative ideas, with convincing ideas, not to embark on right-wing populism. I'm definitely sure that the EU should react on if the European law is violated and if member states are not playing along with the rules. But, you know, it's not the Soviet Union or Moscow. I mean, it's not the EU cannot be a savior, which we often actually hear the calls of the opposition in Poland, Europe, save us. No, it won't save you because it's your responsibility, your task to save the country from the right-wing populists that are dismantling democratic fundaments. And if you cannot do that and wait for someone else to do it, be it the EU, then you're, I guess, not, or they are, I guess, not even in the position to rule and to govern. So this was my point. Not criticizing the EU of getting involved, but rather pointing out who would be the actor and the active part that could tackle the problems.
Thank you very much. My screen here shows a red light, 00000. That is what we've got left. Thank you very much. Shouldn't we give them all a hand? Thank you. We move on to the second panel, Stand Up for Your Democracy. I think that's also a solution-oriented panel where we will focus on not least what can young people do. At least that is what the panel will signal. We will have Tuula Pitkänen, Secretary General of Young European Socialists. Welcome, coming from Finland originally. Yes. Kasper Sand Kjær is representing Danish Youth Council in English. Kasper Sand. There you are. I have some lights here. It's not because I'm completely confused. And then Yascha Mounk, please come back again to us. And as before, we also have some discussions among our together ambassadors, Belas Page. There you are, and you are from Hungary, and Georgios Koloris, there you are. Welcome to you as well. But starting with you, and if we go back to the solution-oriented part of the discussion, what is the youth's role in fighting for standing up for democracy, as the headline is? Would you please start?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. So just for those of you who don't maybe know, the Young European Socialists, my organization, is the umbrella of all of the social democratic and socialist youth organizations in Europe. So we bring together more than 60 party political youth organizations from our family. And maybe at this point it would be relevant, in my opinion, to raise the role of the youth in our party political families. So when it has, like, the involvement of the youth in political life, of course, it has been a topic forever. I think that, like, at least for several decades, we always think that the youth is not involved enough and they're not political enough. First of all, I think that the form for the youth to be political has changed rapidly. I think that youth is not less political in Europe. I think that they are maybe somehow less party political. But then when we want to engage the youth in our political family and in parties in general, which are a very important part of democracy, of course, we often say that we have to reach for youth NGOs, for youth platforms, and have them involved. This is very important, but it's not enough. An NGO is not the same as the party. NGO doesn't play the same role in the political life where you put forward candidates and get them elected. This is job for the parties. So maybe when it comes to involvement of the youth in democracy, this is what I would call for. It would be direct involvement of the youth in the party structure. Meaning the youth organizations, of course, we always speak in favor of independence of the youth organizations, because when the party political youth organization is independent, it always makes a little bit different policy than when it is together with the old guys, if I may. And then it's also that when we want to put our agendas when we want to set the policies in a way that it speaks to the youth in a way, we can ask them, you know. It's not like it's a secret. For example, we always say we want to really speak to the youth, and then when you look, for example, to research, for example, in my country, in Finland, the most important political thing for my generation, according to research, so this is not a matter of opinion, is climate change, which is a perfect topic for our political family. We agree with majority of the young people, but is the climate change our top priority in the election? No. So maybe this would be my takes.
Thank you very much, and I'll go directly to Kasper Sand.
Yeah. Thank you, and good evening. I'm Kasper. I'm president of the Danish Youth Council, which is an umbrella for all the Danish children and youth organizations. All in all, 75. We have the youth parties. We have the scouts. We have the student organizations. A lot of different organizations where young people engage. And I'm representing Social Democratic Youth in Denmark in the Youth Council. I think when it comes to the youth and democracy, there is just as much reason to be worried about the democracy and the support for democracy. When we look at young people across Europe, we can see their trust in politicians is declining. We can see their trust in democratic institutions are declining, their trust in media, and even their trust in democracy itself. And in some countries, some of them which were represented before on the stage, a lot of young people say they don't believe in democracy. So I think there is a reason to be worried. And I think when the populists can point at the politicians, at the political elite, and say that you don't represent the people, you represent your own interests. I think one of the reasons why they have it so easy is because we have forgotten the people's participation in politics. That normal working people is no longer engaged in politics. For 50 years ago, the Social Democrat Party in Denmark had a lot more members, but the Social Democratic Party were also the place where the workers would go to meet their politicians, to discuss and debate with them, tell their stories from the real life, and get a response directly from the politicians. So the political parties were also a very important room for the political debate. And I think our parties, all of them, have forgotten their role in engaging the people in politics. It's all becoming very professional. It's all about the media agenda. It's about campaigning, not about engaging and talking. And I think we can see the result of that when we look at the youth. And one of our main topics is the youth engagement in democracy in Denmark. And we can see when we visit young people in schools, educational institutions, especially the vocational schools, where there are the young workers in training. When we ask them about politics, they say, "Oh, politics, that's not for me. That's the politicians. That's way over in Copenhagen, in their castle. That has nothing to do with me. And I can't influence politics. I haven't a say in politics, and my voice doesn't matter." And we call that the political confidence. Do the youth have a political confidence? And we can see the political confidence is declining, and I think that's That's the most worrying thing, and I think the way out of it, talking about solutions, the way out of it is to engage more young people in the political conversation, debate, and dialogue. Thank you.
And that gives a natural continuation to you, Yasha. How do we engage the youngsters? In your book, you are actually alluding to the fact that young people are much more prone to military rule than elderly people. So how do we do it?
Yeah, so first of all, I believe that the official cutoff for membership in at least the German youth wing of a Social Democratic Party is 35, which seems awfully old to be a young person. But thankfully, I'm 36, so I officially cannot speak for anybody who's young. And so I won't do that. But I think it's a larger question of how do we actually fight for our values, and how do we show citizens, especially young citizens, but all citizens, that they can still have real efficacy, that they actually can come to politics and really make a difference. I think there's a few things. The first thing is that, it is incredibly important to get politically engaged in this moment, because what we're seeing in countries like Poland and Hungary, which we discussed in the last panel, is that once populist governments take over, they can actually transform countries with incredible rapidity. The difference between Poland today and Poland 3 or 4 years ago is vast, and it is because of a relatively lucky, relatively narrow electoral victory. And so the stakes of politics are incredibly high. And so one of the ways that we can fight for democracy is simply to actually get engaged in politics, even if we're not always particularly happy with the political options. Part of the job is to go and change them. So secondly, let's talk about the existing political parties, because I think that they also often are not sufficiently aware of the stakes of this political moment. They think that all of this populist rise is this weird blip. It's a weird moment. We just have to keep our cool, keep doing the things the way we've always done them, and eventually we'll just outlast them and they'll go home again. And that's a huge mistake. Let me do a little bit of party political bashing here. When you look at who the European conservatives chose as a leader for the elections, Manfred Weber, it's somebody who everybody who's ever met him says is not up for the job intellectually. He's not up for the job in terms of being able to connect to people. He's a bad orator. He's a creature of Brussels that doesn't actually speak clearly. And of course, he's somebody who has at every juncture been an ally and an enabler of Viktor Orban in Hungary. He is one of the main reasons why Fidesz is still a member of the European People's Party. And that's all the more shocking because they actually had a decent alternative choice. Look, I'm left of center. I disagree with Alex Stubb on a whole bunch of things, but he is somebody who speaks clearly, who has clear values, who has obviously much more talent, much greater ability to communicate with people. But they went with the choice that for whatever party political reason seems easier. But it's easy to bash them. This is the choice that lots of parties, including lots of social democratic parties across Europe, make day in, day out. And so then we're surprised that people don't trust us to actually do something for them when we choose people we know are mediocre, we know don't stand for any values, and then we're horrified that they go to people whose values we may dislike, but who at least speak clearly. So that's part of what's going on here, and I hope that young people are going to come in and sweep all of that old garden with political parties away. But the other thing is that it's not just about getting people engaged, and it's not just about changing who our candidates are. I think there's these long-term structural drivers of populism. One of the reasons why people don't have trust in the political system is that, if you were born in 1950, it was easy to live your first 25, 30 years of your life and say, well, of course the political system is delivering for me. Look at how much better my life is than when I was a little kid. Look at how many more opportunities I have than my parents did. And that's not the experience of any of us on the stage, right? We're all lucky, I think, in all kinds of ways, but we don't feel like, oh my God, what we have now is so different from what we had when we were kids, and my life is going to keep getting better, right? So we have to think about how to change that again, how to show people that politics is delivering for them, because then they might actually have a sense that, hey, it's worth getting engaged. And that's true on the cultural questions as well. I think we need to have politicians who clearly model how we can hold our societies together. That question earlier was important. And that means not sneering at our fellow citizens, not looking down on them if they vote for populists, not thinking that we're better than our fellow citizens in terms of what we eat and what language we speak and where we go on holidays and what kind of values we have. But also being absolutely clear and uncompromising that we can be patriotic and we can be nationalist, but we have to do that on the basis of treating everybody equally, of not distinguishing between people by the race and the skin color they have or where they were born. And so I think, if we have political forces that do all of that, then despite the skepticism in my work about the extent of support for democracy overall and among young people, the basic values and ideals of liberal democracy are still winning. They're still the ones that appeal the most. But we got to show that we're partisans of those. One way of putting this, and then I'll shut up, is that, we're in a weird position. Because there's people who you guys are social democrats in countries which have deeply been shaped by social democracy, and we're liberal democrats in countries that are liberal democracies. It becomes easy to become the force of the status quo, the force that says, well, look, there's a lot to defend. And there is a lot to defend. And we should do that unabashedly and proudly. But also, the values for which we stand are quite radical, actually. They're pretty far-reaching. And the world is not yet it does not yet conform to those values. There's a lot more progress to be made to make our societies more truly socially fair, more truly liberal, more truly democratic. So I think we have to re-find our own radicalism, which doesn't mean that we go to the political extremes, but we abandon the policies that have worked for a long time. But it does mean that we say, what kind of change would it actually take to make the world look more like what our ideals are? And if we manage to put that forward, then I think people will gain more trust in politics and see it can actually have an impact, and then hopefully young people will get more involved as well.
Thank you very much. I love your analysis of just your definition of young is so wrong. But back to that. Balázs Pais, the first ambassador, Together ambassador. Your comments on what you just heard.
Is it on? Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. First, thank you for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure for me. I'm from Hungary, which we talked about many things.
Do we have all social democrats in Hungary in this hall today? Is this all of you? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so just to brief you about the situation in Hungary regarding the youth. In Hungary, the political apathy among the young people is critical. The destructive and noxious nature of the recent political dialogue, the previous years, and young people, and because of that, young people see politics nothing but as the source of everything which is bad in the country. They see politicians like thieves, like liars, and they see them as the motivators, as the constructors of the governmental media, which broadcasts only propaganda. Because of that, they see politics as a source of inequality, the source of poverty, and, of course, of governmental propaganda, instead of what it really is, the tool of change. And the tool of changing our world to make our society the society of equality, solidarity, and prosperity. Thus, my question would be, in such a political atmosphere, how could the EU promote the political engagement of the youth in Poland and Hungary, to make young people in those countries to be the actors of change instead of leaving for a better life to the northern and western parts of Europe? Thank you.
Yeah, you just start and we take a round.
Thank you very much. In my just a minute ago, I said that in my opinion, the youth is not less political, but I think it's less party political. And when you say that in Hungary, in your opinion, the young people think that politicians, parties, and so on, that they are like criminals, it means actually that the youth does have a political opinion in Hungary, and this political opinion is that there is corruption and things need to change. But this way of what I'm talking about here is like a large and like a wide understanding of what is political. What I mean is that for example, in this case, obviously there is political will to change, but it's not channeled through the existing political forces, meaning the parties and the democratic system. So when you say that the youth is very critical towards the existing political elite, it is political itself to think that. But the system doesn't channel this political will. And I think that when we talk about youth being political, this is one of the core problems, is that I really don't believe that when we think that there is like political apathy among the youth in any country, I don't think that the youth lacks opinions. I think that the system doesn't channel these opinions. I think that our parties or any parties necessarily don't channel these opinions as political change. So when it comes to the role of the European Union, it is a very complicated question, obviously, but I think that in a key role in this question is that with European tools and structures, we should really defend the rule of law and the democratic institutions, freedom of speech, and structures like this. So the channeling of this, I would say, existing political will, whether it is just to overthrow something that's considered to be, for example, corrupt, can be channeled into democratic force.
Kasper?
Well, first of all, I agree that the youth doesn't have a lack of opinions. I totally agree. But my point would be that they have a lack of political confidence. So they have opinions about the society, but they don't believe that they can play a part in changing it. And that's the political apathy. That I don't have a say, I can't do anything with my voice. So I'll just go another way. So I think that's the main issue, and I think that the European Union can play a big part in that, not just in Hungary, but for young people all over Europe. And if any of the members of the parliaments are still awake, they should have an ops on the European Youth Strategy, which has the possibility of making a lot of many different tools you could use to engage young people across Europe in politics, and I think that would be an obvious thing to do in the times we are in now, to go all in on engaging young people in the society and in politics and do it across borders. But the way I've seen the Commission's work with the youth strategy so far, it's not going to make any difference on the youth political engagement.
Kasper, is the youth really political apathetic? I mean, when I was, according to your definition, when I was young, I would say we were apathetic. Because I think I was the only one who wrote a reader's letter to newspaper. And no one did that. Nowadays, my kids, they are writing on Twitter and Facebook, and they're really participating. They're just participating in another way. So,
but okay, I don't think it's black and white. Of course, there are many young people engaged, tweeting their opinions, going into party politics, going into NGOs, everything. A lot of young people are engaged, but I think the young generation now is more split than ever in the ones that are engaged and the ones that are not. And we can see that, for example, in election participation, in turnouts, who turn out at the elections. It's in Denmark, it would be white, young, well-educated women. They have an election rate of 90%, and young men with an immigrant background and no education, no work, they have a turnout of 10%. So it's really divided who engages and who doesn't. And when I talk about the apathy, it's not young white women at the universities I'm talking about. I think they're going to be fine. They're going to get engaged and all that. It's if you can say it so, the bottom in engaging and in political confidence. And that. Yeah, so that's one point on the political apathy among youth. I think there is a truth in that every generation has to find their own way into politics and into democracy. So we can't apply what worked the generation before to the young generations. And I think we have a lot of work, all of us in the youth organization, on finding the way for this generation to get engaged. And I'm not sure we have all the answers yet, because I don't believe it's Twitter and Facebook that are going to be the new medias of political engagement. I think they are disturbing political engagement. And just to give an example, when we ask young people in Denmark, have you ever once in your life put a political opinion on Facebook? 60% says no, never. And I could never think about doing it, because you don't know what you get thrown back in your face. So I don't think Facebook and Twitter is the answer. I think there are other ways of engaging young people.
But you are talking about the same divide as Kasper was just doing in your presentation before. It's about education.
Yeah, absolutely. So you see very clear divides by education and by the economic dynamism of regions as well, right? So when you look at who votes for populists, with very few exceptions, it's not necessarily poorer people than wealthier people, but it is people who are less educated, who live in parts of a country that is less affluent, that has had less recent economic investment, even where the share of jobs that might be automated away is higher. So just as one data point in the United States, Donald Trump won 2/3 of American counties, but only about 1/3 of America's GDP. That shows you something about the difference of the kinds of areas in which you won, the kinds of areas in which you didn't win. And you see that at the individual level as well, right? You're educated, you have an experience of being efficacious, of organizing some club at your high school, at doing a little campaign about, your school changing, to more recyclable, plates or whatever. And so you feel like, oh, I can actually go and have a voice in politics. Whereas you're less educated, you have less of those kinds of experiences, you feel like nobody listens to me anyway, what kind of efficacy do I have?
So that's a diagnosis. How do you solve that? How do you get them included?
Well, I just want to make sure that we bring it back to Hungary for a moment as well. And I just want to say two things about that. The first, as a social scientist looking at this, there is a paradox that the incredible freedom that Central Europe now has, that it didn't used to have, of traveling, makes it harder to sustain freedom in those societies. Ivan Krastev, the great Bulgarian political scientist, always reminds people of the joke about what the two greatest places of opportunity are. Where do you really have to go in Sofia if you want to go and make it in the world? It's Terminal 1 and Terminal 2 of the international airport, right? Because the easiest way to make it if you grew up in Bulgaria is to go abroad. And of course that means that a lot of the people we've been talking about, the people who are engaged, educated, who are self-confident, a lot of them leave those societies. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to engage young people in them, because the people who the prime targets would be, they're torn. Do I stay and fight for my country in really difficult circumstances? Or do I go and do that master's program at some great university in Denmark or in England or in the United States? And a lot of them understandably make the latter choice. And that's one of the challenges. I also want to just say a little bit about, I think the question was, what can the EU do to engage young people there? And I'm not sure that's exactly the EU's role, right? So there's been a lot of debate in the previous panel as well, but what should the EU do in Poland and Hungary, and what should it not do? I think the EU should be very careful about looking like it's trying to get engaged in party political fights within Poland and Hungary. But I also think that the EU should be very, very clear in saying that the European Union is a club of values, and that if countries violate those values, then that will have very real consequences. And sometimes the arguments I hear for being very cautious about sending less money to Warsaw and Budapest for the aspiring dictators in those countries to exploit for their domestic purposes, or even in starting Article 7 proceedings, just strike me of laziness. They strike me of, we've always done things a particular way, let's just find some excuse for doing it the same way, and the easiest excuse is, oh, they'll exploit it to say that the EU is somehow against Hungary or against Poland, and it's going to harm the people fighting for democracy in Poland and Hungary. We've had years of not doing anything, and it doesn't seem to have helped the opposition there. We don't know what's going to help the opposition. I agree that in the end, the opposition itself has got to get its act together. But we can at least show that we're people of principle, who stand up for the Copenhagen criteria and for the core values of the European Union, and that we recognize that over the long run, if we're going to tolerate Poland and Hungary as members of the European Union under the rule of increasingly authoritarian governments, then the EU has abolished itself. When we're no longer a club of values, we're simply an association of random countries that happen to be in Europe that pursue mutual trade interests or something like that. And so I think in the end, we shouldn't make a decision of how to treat Poland and Hungary on the basis of what's likely to help the opposition. That's not our place. We should make them on the basis of what preserves the core nature and values of a European Union. Obviously, always leaving the door open, in the great hope in Poland, for example, that a more democratic government will come back to power relatively soon. I think in Poland, the opposition still has a real chance of doing that, but not to influence events there, but in order to preserve what the nature of the European Union is.
Thank you. Georgios Kouleros. And before you pose your question, if any of you have a question, please mark your fingers. I hope to see one or two. You. But first up here. No, you're not.
It's on now.
Yes. On.
Yeah. Hello to everyone. I'm George from Greece. I have been selected as Together Ambassador. After the financial crisis of 2008, we have three major issues related to the youth population. The working poor, the youth unemployment, which is really high. For example, in Greece is 40%. In Spain, in Italy, in southern countries is also high. And of course, the needs. Youth population, not in education, employment or training. These people, the youth population, sometimes or usually they are disappointed from the political parties, they do not have trust to institutions, they do not have trust to the EU structure. However, what EU, because these people maybe are the most vulnerable to populism and populist politicians. However, what EU should do to eliminate this phenomenon and to engage the youth population more in politics is the creation of decent jobs, a more inclusive growth, and the improvement of living conditions an appropriate tool in this direction? Thank you very much.
We'll go on that. Please answer shortly, briefly, because we are running out of time. Yes, Kasper?
Okay, shortly. Very good question. I think maybe just 2 points for me. I think the fight for decent work, for not having working poors, for that nobody in our generation should be in a group called NEETs, young people without education or employment. I think maybe that could be one of the key topics for us as a youth in Europe to organize around, because that is an issue, of course, mostly in the southern European countries, but in all European countries. In Denmark, every 10th young people is not in education or employment. So I think we have that, we share that across Europe as a young generation. I think maybe that should be one of the topics we can organize and find ourselves around. Okay, that's one thing. I think the whole financial crisis, austerity, has been one of the worst events for the democracy in Europe. And for me, I have this image in my head from the years after 2008, where the European Council, they met again and again and again on what should we do? Europe is in a crisis. How do we get the economy back on track? And they came out of the meetings, and Merkel and Hollande and before that Sarkozy and the reporters said, okay, have you found a solution? Have you now have you got the economy back on track? And they look at the reporters and they said, well, we will have to see Monday morning when the market opens. And I think, that feeling of who has the power over the economy, I think that has been truly an attack on European democracy.
Tolle. No, Tolle, and then I'll go to the floor. Is that okay? Because I would like to have some. Yeah. At the same time. But you wanted to answer shortly, briefly?
Well, I can say very briefly. I think that the situation that you described for the young people in Greece, it is a perfect example of the structural flaw that we kind of have in the EU. What I mean with this is that in the EU we have integrated our economies, we have opened the borders of the trade. But then when you are making this kind of an integration, it's clear that you cannot put a society into sectors of trade, education, employment, and social, and so on, and then just integrate one of them, just open the borders for the economy, and then the rest has to follow. I think this is a very big flaw in the structure of the EU, that it's also and the result is exactly what you're describing. So I'm actually maybe radical enough to say that what the EU can do is that it can reform its structures in this sense, and a good start is social pillar.
Let's go to questions. Can you do it briefly and brief answers? Yes.
Yeah, very briefly, it's concerning how populism is affecting the deliberate democracy. Because as Yasha Monk said, if you oppose a populist, they would typically say that you're illegitimate, and also that they would have this performance legitimacy and think we get things done. But if you oppose those with real facts, they would claim that it could be fake news. So how do you argue against a true populist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, populists always have a little bit of an easier game because they can make outsized promises that they don't have to keep because they don't care what happens 5 years later or 10 years later. Whereas I think for the defenders of liberal democracy, we have to play a more long-term game. If we manage to win an election by making huge promises and then we get into office and we can't deliver on any of those, the populists win the next time round. So we have to be a little bit more careful. But I don't think that's an excuse for speaking about politics in a boring way, for using lots of technical terms that people don't understand, for saying that it's not possible to fight for clear values to which people can relate. And so, I think we need to remember that politics and democracy always has to do with passion, always has to do with values, always has to do with communicating who you're for. And there's ways of doing that without making false promises, without victimizing minorities, or without violating any of the other principles of liberal democracy.
I'll take a question from here.
Is it working? Yes. Hi, my name is Timothée Lucius and I'm from France and I'm an active member of the Jeunes Socialistes in France. So it's great to see a YES member on the stage. And in France we had some trouble with our organization, as you might know, but we used to be what we call in France éducation populaire, which means like popular education, a way to give tools to the young, also to understand politics. And I think that's something we don't do anymore with young organization, and that's one of the reasons we have become more technical, like our less orderly organization, if I can say that like that. And how can we bring those tools of teaching politics to the young back, because it's easier for the youth to understand politics if it has been explained by the youth themselves.
Sola.
Thank you very much. Also very happy to see somebody from MGS here. So I think this is a very relevant point. So when I spoke about the role of the youth within the parties in the beginning, this is actually in the core of what I mean. So what we have seen throughout Europe, and this is for all parties, so not just for us. It's the decline in membership, but especially a decline in youth membership and the membership of the youth organizations. Like, I think that in the 70s, like my youth organization in Finland had like the Social Democratic Youth, I think they had like 40,000 members. And I think like vast majority of that has completely disappeared. This is a matter of changing times. So also you cannot, like I said, expect the youth to be political exactly on the same way. So you cannot expect that this being political is still channeled through exactly your youth organization necessarily. But still, when it comes to our political family and our parties, we should take it seriously because like in the level of a society, having democratic youth-led youth organizations also in the political sphere is a matter of education and giving tools for somebody to rise in the political structure, to mobilize supporters, maybe get elected, and not just get elected, just only to be a part of it, you know. So everybody who is in the youth organizations definitely, like you said earlier, shouldn't aim for public office. You can just hang around, like I said. So I don't have a very easy solution for that, but what I would say is that actually this is also a matter of culture that we have generally, for example, in schools, in universities, in education. I know that where, for example, among all of our youth organizations, one of the highest memberships that we have is in Sweden, and in Sweden you have a tradition that you have very strong school elections, where the youth organizations are part of this school election. This kind of raises the young generations into this political life and into this like understanding of also party politics as one part. So these kind of structures can be put in place, but of course it takes time and will.
We take the very last, very brief question, and we will give you the floor afterwards for very, very brief answers. Yes. Yes, you are the brief man.
Sorry, Kasper, can you see the auditorium is empty? What else would you have done to get more bums on seats? I mean, this city has almost 200,000 young people, and you can hardly see 20 people here.
Oh, that was a punch. Kasper, it's your city.
Yeah, but it's not my event, so
Could I say it is a little bit of fake news? I can see at least 23 people here, and actually perhaps more like 70. But you know,
I agree. It's the inauguration all over again. Well, I think we have to start earlier, because you're not going to have young people walking in from the streets to this totally nerdy elite debate on European democracy and politics arranged by some European party they have never heard about. So I think we have to start earlier, which brings me to the question before, which I would have liked to answer, because I think it's a key to engaging young people in politics, to have the engagement done by youth to youth. I think that's a key. The school election in Sweden, we have just copied that in Denmark. This spring we are doing it for the third time. We are using the political youth parties, bringing them out in the schools. We have a 3-week theme in the schools where the teachers do democratic political education, and then the youth parties are doing an election campaign, and it all culminates with a kind of mock election where all the pupils go into a voting booth and vote for one of the Danish party. It's an amazing activity, and we can see how it engages young people in politics, and it really opened their eyes. Another activity we are doing is, we call it Days of Democracy, that we do it in the vocational schools where young workers are trained. We have them a whole day, where we have young people from the political youth organizations, from the student organizations, doing political education, democratic education, advocacy training, and then at the end they have a chance to be a part of the youth organization. I think that's the way to do it. We have to get out in the schools, out to have a real dialogue, a real debate with young people to engage them. And then 5 years later, then they will be sitting here.
Or maybe the problem was our perverted definition of being young, which went wrong. I think we are a lot of young people in here. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you for the questions. Good. I can see the reception is coming up. The food is getting cold. They're taking out the food again, so we have plenty of time. And now we come to the presentation of Together Ambassadors, and that will not be me. That will be Enrique Guerrero Salom. I hope I was pronouncing it as it could be. Member of the European Parliament, part of the S&D group. You are former vice president, and you are president of Global Progressive Forum, welcome to you.
Good afternoon in Spanish, good evening in Danish. Time has come to use massively headphones because I'm going to speak in Spanish. Not only to pay tribute to Felipe González, who was one of the main actors in establishing the Copenhagen criteria, not only to tell you that we have a new socialist government in one of the biggest countries of the European Union, but also because, as Mette, your next Prime Minister, said at the beginning of her speech, remembering the time that she as a minister were taking part in Brussels meetings, it's always easier to speak in our own language. So I moved to Spanish. En relación con...
Regarding the last thing that was said about young people, it's true that the second part of the event was led by young people. Usually they're the ones listening, but they were really coming forward and talking in that second part of our event. I'd like to present the ambassadors. Firstly, Carolina, who will be talking about why she is committed to the defense of democracy and the EU's values, and why she has joined this ambassadors group. And before I present her, I've got a couple of comments. Firstly, just to tell you that a lot of young people have been following us on social media. So what we're doing isn't just taking place here amongst us, but it's been taken further, and it's often these young active people that are relaying what we're talking about here. Secondly, regarding content, part of our debate here is how, in what we offer politically, how to include socialist proposals about things that are of interest to people, and what worries people. In terms of what interests people, well, people are interested in things linked to their life: education, health, working conditions, social protection, incomes. In terms of what worries people, well, that's things like fear, the lack of certainty, immigration, the possible loss of peace, conflict, terrorist attacks, insecurity amongst people. If you look primarily at what's worrying people, traditionally social democrats are on shaky footing there, but these are issues that we need to not ignore. We need to broach these issues. So part of what we need to do is include in our policy issues that are of interest to the daily life of people and trying to allay their fears, because that is the ground that is fertile for populism. Before I present Carolina to you, now it's often been said that we need to rebuild or renew the European project, which was, until recently, largely supported by European people. I'm from a generation of Spanish people. Now, we came into the EU in 1986. not only can we remember the Second World War, which is the reason for the birth of the EU, but we remember how Greece, Portugal and Spain lived under dictatorship for 25 years after the Second World War, and Europe was the promised land. That was the where we wanted to get to. Ortega, a Spanish philosopher, said, Spain is the problem, Europe is the solution. If we look at that phrase years down the line, then that means that none of our countries are going to solve these issues on their own, but we can do that together. And that's linked to the 4 conditions that Jacques Delors talked about. Now, we are and we have to be a competitive economy anchored in a space of freedom and human rights, with a social democracy to protect people, with convergence within the EU, and with solidarity outside, external solidarity. And linking up on what Tully was saying, linking this into the fight against climate change, because climate change not only jeopardizes the future, but the very notion of having a future at all. So Carolina, please come to the podium and tell us who you are. Tell us what you're here for and why you've joined the ambassadors groups. And some of them have already spoken. And let's hear why you're fighting for the EU and democracy.
Unfortunately, I don't understand Spanish. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I come from Poland, so the topic we're discussing tonight is an interesting and important one for me from a very personal perspective. Not only because there was a beautiful idea hidden behind the establishment of the Copenhagen criteria to create a union of common values, a union that has their own inviolable rules. It is also because the European Council Summit here in Copenhagen 25 years ago was dedicated to countries like Poland, to the Central and Eastern European countries that were supposed to join the EU. And it saddens me deeply that right now those are exactly the same countries, with Poland and Hungary on the top of the list, that question, to say the least, our common values. And I could mention here many examples of the Polish government trying to not respect the European values, but it's not the point. The establishment of the criteria 25 years ago was a beautiful beginning. However, now, when our unity and hence the chance for a further integration are under threat, we can easily see how all these previous achievements can easily be lost. And I think the reason why people are losing their belief in the EU or in democracy in general is because people are generally afraid of what is unknown. And the EU is something really unknown for the people. In Poland, most of the young people don't feel European. They are Polish, they're just Polish. And I'm not surprised, since for them the EU is only about some bureaucrats from Brussels, and maybe the only positive aspect is that they give us the money. But of course the EU is not only about the bureaucrats, it's about each and every of us. And the other obvious thing is that it's not about the money, it's about the values and so on. So as the European elections are fast approaching, I think that young people like me or other Together ambassadors who actually are pretty positive and believe in the European project, we should be the ones who should educate other people about the EU, who should somehow arouse the the sense of European patriotism among others, and to spread and promote the democracy, the human rights, and the rule of law, because those are 3 pillars that should shape our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are getting very close to the very end. The last point is Mr. Joseph Weidenholzer, member of the European Parliament, Vice President in the S&D Group, and Jeppe Kofod, our host, will come out together now and present us for conclusions and a statement, a declaration. And with these words, I think it's also the end for me. I shall ask, after the two gentlemen has been speaking, I will ask all participants to come up here for a family photo. The rest of you can go to the reception. Food is still there. It's still fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming to the end of this afternoon and evening. I think it was a very interesting, challenging discussion, and the resolution is already provided. May I just quote the last sentence? It says, now, a quarter of a century after the Copenhagen criteria were established, we need them more than ever. Together we fight for more democracy, more than ever. And this is really true. So in my daily work as the responsible vice president for rule of law in our group, I used this phrase, Copenhagen criteria, I think 3,000 times, 20 times a day or more. And it was really helpful because in all these cases, I'm also a member of the Rule of Law Task Force, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Malta, Bulgaria, and many others in the pipeline. This is a magic word. Copenhagen criteria brings people back to reality, brings them to a rational ground where we can discuss things. So it was very helpful. In the case of Hungary, it actually made it possible that the Parliament could take this decision to trigger Article 7 in the case of Hungary. It was the first time in the history of our House that this had been done. So this was a great success, at least for us, to collect a two-thirds majority behind us. So it means that many EPP people had also to vote with us. This was important, and it wouldn't have been possible without this. In the other cases, Poland, I'm a bit more optimistic on Poland than on Hungary, because at least Poland accepted to comply with the ruling of the European Court, and there is also, they did it because there is big pressure in Poland. And it's very important to see this, that many Polish people, I know that there are still problems, but using the word konstytucja. This is, again, a word which is part of our tradition. And just share one moment, we had an exhibition, photo exhibition of the EPP part of the Polish, the Polish party, and they were organizing an exhibition on demonstrations in Poland. And we attended this exhibition, many colleagues, and at the end of this, people started to shout "Konstytucja, Konstytucja," and this was in the House of the European Parliament. So this is something important about a Copenhagen criteria. And we also now, the European Parliament was now voted on a resolution on a rule of law mechanism, a permanent mechanism where we can really challenge all these problems. And the next mandate will be very active on this. So are we in a kind of, can we be optimistic? No, because we're living in historic times, and at least when I'm not awake, when I'm sleeping, the 1930s come into my mind, yeah? And we are maybe 1932 something, yeah? It can happen. AfD in Germany, Le Pen, Salvini, the guys in my country who just destroyed the country. So this is possible. But if you read the history books, there were always moments where the history could have changed. And it is not over yet, so we still can influence it. And we can influence it, as we discussed today, if we are paying attention to the ordinary people, if we, as Jeppe said, not try to explain to the people what's going on, if we try to act together and on behalf of the people. So if we address the real problems, the social problems, and therefore, if we answer the fears of the people, and I think there are many possibilities for us as social democrats to answer them more than other parts of the progressive sector. Maybe if you look at Europe, the answer does not come from the center. It's not Germany. Germany is a disarray, France, Italy. But we have Portugal. And Portugal showed if you are really answering the questions of the people, are really trying to comfort what people are anxious about, that you can win elections. So from the south and maybe from the north. And I would really, really be very happy if you would have a social democratic prime minister very soon in your country. And just let me share one observation I had. We went to see our friends in the United States, and we met different groups of activists. And there was one group of high school students for Bernie Sanders. A lady, 20 years old, she was very interested. She was asking me a lot of questions, and she said, I want to know more about Denmark. I said, why Denmark? Yeah, I mean, she said, yes, because Bernie is always talking about Denmark. So Denmark is the future for us in America. So let's hope that you will win the elections, and together from the north and the south, we will change Europe. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joseph, for this very excellent presentation of the declaration resolution that will be on the webpage, and I hope you will take it home and use it and continue in this very important debate and reflections. Thank you to Enrique also for presenting the Together Ambassador, but also for explaining the importance of what we're doing. And thank you to I think everybody who made this event possible, people that came here, but also people online and people who took part in the debate and preparation. Thank you to the team behind it at the S&D Group Secretariat. You do a great job, a huge job. And thank you to the moderator. Well, he is here, Michael. Yeah. Good to see you. Thank you so much for your work. Of course, yeah, let's give him a hand. And I would also, of course, thank both Poul Nyrup Rasmussen, Mette Frederiksen, Yascha Mounk, and others who really gave excellent presentations. Thanks to all the speakers, all the panelists that went up here and were so engaged. Thanks to you for coming. And I tried to count how many European countries that are present here today, but it's a lot. Yeah, Austria, as we just heard, Hungary, Poland. Of course, we have people there, but we have Germany, we have Portugal, we have a lot of people from around. So it's fantastic, and that's the purpose of this. It's not just, it's very important it's in Copenhagen because of Copenhagen criteria, but it's an all-European debate, and we want to bridge people across Europe around the very important debate, how to save our democracy, how to renew our democracy. I have 2 takeaways, and then I will leave you for the reception, and I don't want to stand between you and food and drinks. That's really horrible. But 2 takeaways, I could have said many more, but I just have 2 things. First, what I heard from Mette, Paul, and others, if we don't show that not only politics matters, but political decision can change reality for the people we represent, then we are lost. Yeah. Too often, I think many people look at politicians and say, well, you run a campaign, you go to elections, you win, but you don't change anything anyway. So we need to show, for example, like Mette said, When we say we want to take on the big corporations that do not pay their fair taxes in Europe and undermining our finance of our welfare states, we say we want to do that. So we want a minimum corporate tax in Europe and ensure that they are also contributing to our hospitals, schools, kindergartens, and so on. Or the greedy financial sector that is now in this country, we've seen, unfortunately, with the Danske Bank case, are exploiting our trust and our system and facilitating large money laundering. We have to stop that. And we need to show that we will take all the tools in our hands, that we will make a difference. I think that's the first thing. Political decisions shall make a change. And I think it hasn't done that too often, even in our own family. Secondly, and that's very important, and I would get back to where I started. I mean, we sometimes, I think, take our democracy for granted. It's like relationship between people. If you start taking them for granted for too long, you start losing them. Yeah, and it's a little bit the same about our democracies in Europe. We need to understand that our democracy is a living thing. We need to not to take it for granted or just think about an electoral system or something like that. It's a living mechanism. It requires we renew it, we respect each other, we fight for people to be engaged. If we don't do that and take that seriously, I think we will lose it in the longer run. So with these words, let's go out and fight. The S&D group, the Social Democrats and Socialists throughout Europe, we will win. We are self-confident from the north to the far south, Joseph, from Portugal to Denmark, and so on. We will win, and we need your support. We need a common effort. So thank you so much for all of you participants for coming. And now I would just have to say welcome to the reception. Please stay and talk. It's part of this event. Thank you so much for coming.